Welcome back to Potter Eclipse. Today's What If. What if Morticia and Gomez Addams raised Harry beside Wednesday as their own? Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a new story never slips past you. Comfortable? Good, let's begin. Chapter 1, A Suitable Home. It was a beautiful morning for a funeral, which was fortunate because the Addams family had come all the way from America to attend one. The rain had arrived precisely on schedule. It fell in long silver ropes over the churchyard of Little Winging, beating on the yews, filling the sunken letters of the older stones until the names ran black. Most of the mourners had fled to their cars. The Adamses remained, arranged around the open grave in a row of impeccable black, and they were the only people present who appeared to be enjoying themselves. "A lovely turnout," said Morticia Addams, surveying the empty churchyard with the satisfaction of a hostess whose guests have all had the decency to leave early. Her voice was low and unhurried, the sort of voice that made people lean in without knowing why they did it. Rain slid from the point of her black veil and did not seem to touch her. Cousin Ophidia would have loathed it. She never could bear to be the center of attention. "Then we've done her proud," said Gomez. He stood at his wife's shoulder, hatless, his dark hair plastered flat, a cigar clenched between his teeth and defying the weather through what could only be spite. He watched two gravediggers lower the coffin with the frank admiration of a man watching fine craftsmen at work. "Cara mia, look at their form, look at the wristwork on the taller one. You don't see technique like that anymore." "You're staring, Gomez. I can't help it. When the light hits you like this, half-drowned and radiant, I forget my manners entirely." He seized her hand and began to work his way up the inside of her wrist with a series of ardent kisses. "Every raindrop that touches you, I envy it, I hate it, I want to challenge it to a duel." "Later, mon amour," Morticia murmured. "There are children present." The children in question stood a little apart, and they were not watching the coffin. They had already seen a great many coffins and considered the subject exhausted. Pugsley, round and cheerful in a black funeral suit, was conducting a private experiment involving how much of his own weight in rainwater a bowler hat could hold before the brim gave way. Beside him, unmoving, stood his sister. Wednesday Addams was 5 years old, which was a fact she resented, because 5 was an unserious age, and she had never been unserious in her life. She had 2 black braids that the rain had not disturbed, a face the color of candle wax, and eyes that regarded the world with the patient disappointment of a judge who has heard every excuse. She was not watching the grave either. She was watching the hedge. There was something behind the hedge. Wednesday had noticed it completely and without appearing to, which was how she noticed everything. A pale shape at the churchyard's edge, where the consecrated ground gave way to a lane, and beyond the lane a row of identical houses with identical square lawns, all of them the exact gray-beige of overcooked porridge. The shape had been there some minutes. It did not move the way lost animals moved. It moved the way something moved when it was trying very hard not to be seen and had not yet learned how. "Mother," Wednesday said. Morticia turned at once. When Wednesday spoke, the family stopped what it was doing because Wednesday did not waste words, and a word from her was worth a paragraph from anyone else. "Yes, my little scorpion, there's a child in the hedge." Gomez removed his cigar. "A child in the hedge," he said it the way another father might say a birthday, a pony, a small fortune in unmarked bills. "A boy," said Wednesday. "He's been watching the funeral. He hasn't blinked in a while. I like him." They crossed the wet grass together, all of them in no particular hurry, and the small shape at the edge of the churchyard did not run, though every muscle in it was clearly arranged for running. He was perhaps 4 years old. He was extremely thin in the specific way of a child who is thin because someone has decided he should be, and he wore a gray t-shirt that would have fit a boy 3 times his size, so that it hung off one shoulder and pooled at his knees like a shed skin. His knees were scraped. His feet were bare on the cold stone. His hair was black and stuck up in every direction, a wild escaping tangle, and under it on his forehead there was a thin scar shaped like a bolt of lightning, still pink, still new-looking, though it plainly was not new. His eyes were green. They were the green of a bottle held up to a candle, and they went from face to face in the group of strangers coming toward him, taking their measure, deciding how fast he would have to be. Then he looked at Wednesday, and Wednesday looked back at him, and something passed between them that had no name and needed none. "Hello," said Morticia, and knelt in the mud without a thought for her gown, so that she was at his height, so that she was looking up at him a little, which no adult had ever done in his memory. "You've been standing in the rain a long time." Harry said nothing. His arms were wrapped around himself. "That's all right," she said. "So have we." She tilted her head and rain ran off the veil, and she smiled, and it was not a smile that showed teeth, but it reached all the way to her pale eyes and stayed there. "You're welcome to stand in it with us. It's much better rain over here. We chose this spot particularly." "You're not supposed to talk to me," he said. His voice was small and rusted from disuse. "I'm not supposed to be here. Aunt Petunia said stay in the garden. I didn't touch anything." "How dreary of her," Morticia said without heat, as one notes that the weather has turned. "Gardens are for the dead, and even the dead find them tedious. What is your name?" His mouth worked. He looked for a moment like someone who had genuinely forgotten or had never been sure he was allowed to have one. Boy, he said. They call me boy, sometimes they call me the other thing. His chin came up a fraction, and there was iron under the rust, and Wednesday, watching, catalogued it and approved. My name's Harry, Harry Potter, I know it even if they don't use it. Harry, said Gomez, tasting it, rolling it, finding it excellent. He crouched too, so that the whole marvelous family was now folded down to his level in the churchyard mud, and he put out one broad hand. Harry, a fine, upstanding, honest name. I'm Gomez Addams. This magnificent creature is my wife, Morticia, the light of my life, the shadow on my grave. That is my son, Pugsley, who is currently drowning a hat. And this is my daughter, Wednesday. She noticed you. She notices everything. It's a gift and a curse, mostly a gift. Harry looked at the offered hand as though it might be a trap. In his experience, hands were. He shook it anyway. That more than anything was the thing Wednesday would remember for years afterward and refuse to explain. That the half-starved boy in the graveyard, who had every reason to bolt, chose instead to put his cold hand into the hand of a stranger and shake it because it was the polite thing to do, and some stubborn ember in him had decided the world would not take his manners even if it had taken everything else. Pleased to meet you, Harry said. You talk funny, I like it. Wednesday stepped forward. She reached into the pocket of her black pinafore and withdrew, after some rummaging, a single item, which she held out to him on her flat palm with the gravity of a queen bestowing a fief. It was the head of a doll. It had no eyes. Its hair had been cut off close to the plastic scalp. This is Marie Antoinette, Wednesday said. I removed the rest of her. You may hold her. I don't lend her to anyone. Harry took the doll's head very carefully, the way you take something precious that you have not earned. He looked at it. He looked at Wednesday. Thank you, he said. What happened to the rest of her? History, said Wednesday, and that settled it. Whatever it was settled. Morticia rose, and mud fell from her gown in soft clots, and she looked at the row of porridge-colored houses across the lane, and something moved behind her serene face that made Gomez, who knew every one of her weathers, go very still. Harry, she said, would you show us where you live? Number 4 Privet Drive was the fourth identical house in a row of identical houses, and it announced its philosophy from the doormat, which said, wipe your feet in cheerful blue letters, and meant it. The lawn was cut to a uniform inch. The car was washed. The curtains were drawn to precisely the same height in every window, so that the house had the blank, disapproving look of a face that has smoothed away every expression except the one that says no. Petunia Dursley opened the door on the second knock and found, arranged on her welcome mat, the single most alarming tableau of her entire life. There was a woman in black who did not blink enough. There was a man beside her with a cigar in the eyes of a duelist. There were 2 children, one of whom was holding a hat full of rainwater, and one of whom was simply looking at Petunia in a way that made the back of her neck cold. And there in the middle of them, holding a headless doll and standing straighter than Petunia had ever seen him stand, was Harry. Good afternoon, said Morticia. We've brought back your nephew. We found him admiring a funeral. He isn't ours, Petunia said, her hand going to the string of her apron, her eyes cutting left and right down the immaculate street, checking, always checking, who might be watching. That is, he is, but he's a burden we took on out of Christian charity, and he's been nothing but trouble since the day that man left him on our step like a bottle of milk. And I'll thank you too, left him on your step, Gomez repeated, and his voice was warm, delighted, terrible. Like a bottle of milk, Tish, did you hear that? They put the boy out with the milk. That's French, Morticia said serenely, though it was not, and it did not matter, because Gomez had already seized her hand and gone rigid with adoration. Cara mia, later, darling. Vernon Dursley arrived in the hallway behind his wife with the ponderous inevitability of weather, purple already climbing his neck, a man who dealt with anything unusual on his doorstep by becoming larger and louder until it went away. He looked at the Addamses and opened his mouth to deploy it. Now see here, we'd like to keep him, said Wednesday. Silence fell on Privet Drive. Somewhere a lawnmower stopped, its owner having plainly heard. Vernon's mouth stayed open. Petunia's hand went to her throat. You'd like to, Vernon said. You'd like to keep the boy. Yes, said Wednesday. She did not elaborate. She had said the thing, and the thing was true, and she saw no reason to decorate it. For one long moment the Dursleys warred with themselves, and both of the watching Addams parents saw exactly what was in it. Vernon's animal calculation, the cost of the boy weighed against the sudden miraculous possibility of his absence. Petunia's face doing a complicated thing, a flicker of something under the fear that might, in a kinder woman, have grown into shame. They saw 2 people look at a 4-year-old they were meant to protect and feel, unmistakably, relief. Morticia saw it and held it cold and clear, the way you hold a stone you intend to keep. You can't just take a child, Petunia said, but it came out weak, a formality, a woman covering a bet she has already decided to fold. No, Morticia agreed. That would be uncivilized. We'll do it properly. There are papers for these things. My husband adores papers. She turned her head a fraction. Gomez. I'll have my solicitor telephone within the hour, Gomez said, glowing. Guardianship, adoption, whatever pleases the lady. He's the finest lawyer money can buy, and half of them can't be bought at all. He once got a hanged man acquitted, posthumously, cost extra. Vernon Dursley looked at his wife looked at the doorframe, and Vernon Dursley, purple draining to an ordinary blotched pink, did the arithmetic one final time and arrived, as such men always do, at the answer that cost him the least. "Well," he said with the air of a man being immensely reasonable at great personal expense, "if it's all done proper, legal, signed, we wouldn't want the boy unhappy." He had never in 4 years wanted the boy anything at all, and everyone on the doorstep knew it, and Harry knew it best, and Harry looked up at the tall, pale woman who did not blink and understood, in the wordless way of small children, that a door had opened in the wall of his life that he had not known was a wall. "Go and fetch your things, Harry," Morticia said gently. Harry looked at the cupboard under the stairs, which he had been about to have to explain, and then he looked at his own bare feet, and then he looked up. "I don't have any," he said. "There isn't any, it's all not mine." Wednesday considered this. Then she took his hand, the one not holding the headless doll, and she said, "Good, neither do the best people. Come on. Lurch is warming the car and he gets impatient." She turned her flat, dark gaze on the Dursleys, and delivered the only farewell any of them would ever receive from the Addams family. "You have a very tidy house," she said. "I've never seen anything so frightening in my life." They did not, of course, drive back to America. The Addamses never traveled without somewhere to stay, and Gomez owned property the way other men own socks, in bulk and without keeping track. This particular property he had won in a card game from a Romanian count who cheated, and was caught, and was made to pay in real estate. It stood on a fold of moor in the wet green nowhere of the English West Country, an hour past the last village that would admit to knowing where it was. It was called, on the deed, Blackpool Grange. Everyone who lived there called it home. It rose out of the moor mist like something dreamed rather than built, all crooked towers and iron railings shaped like reaching hands, its slate roof sagging so that the whole silhouette had the friendly, exhausted droop of an old dog. Ivy had eaten the east wing, a bog had eaten the folly. On the front lawn, if it could be called a lawn, a family cemetery kept its own quiet company under a leaning oak, the stones softened with moss, the newest of them fresh enough to be legible, so that guests coming up the drive could read welcome on the gate and 20 feet later rest in pieces on the nearest marker and be under no illusions about the tone of the establishment. Harry pressed his face to the car window as they came up the drive and did not say anything for a long time. The car was enormous and black and smelled of leather and faintly of gunpowder. The driver was the largest human being Harry had ever seen, a great gray slab of a man in a butler's coat who had said, on being introduced, one word which was MMMRRRR, and which Harry had understood perfectly to mean hello, welcome, mind the door. "That's Blackpool Grange," Wednesday said, following his gaze. "It's falling down, we're very proud of it." "It's the best house I've ever seen," Harry said, and meant it with his whole small body, and Wednesday turned her head and looked at him for a moment with an expression that on any other face would have been the beginning of a smile. "There's a graveyard on the lawn," she said, pointing, as the leaning stones slid past the window under the oak. "That's Great-Uncle Blackwood, and that's Cousin Cackle, and the small one is where we buried Pugsley for an afternoon last spring to see if he minded. He minded. We dug him up in time for supper." She said it the way other children recited the names of pets. "You can have a plot if you like. Everyone should have somewhere to end up. It's tidy." Harry looked at the little cemetery, at the moss and the leaning stones and the fresh welcome on the gate, and something in him that had spent 4 years braced for the next unkindness let go quietly without his noticing, the way a fist unclenches in sleep. "I'd like a plot," he said. "Thank you. Nobody's ever given me anything to end up in before." Wednesday nodded, satisfied, as though he had passed a difficult examination, which, by the private standards of Wednesday Addams, he had. The car crunched to a stop. Lurch came around and opened the door with a courtly bow that folded him nearly in half, and Harry climbed out onto gravel that steamed faintly in the cold, and the great front doors of the Grange swung open before anyone had touched them, and a bald man shot out of them and down the steps like a cannonball made of joy. "They're back," the bald man bellowed. He was round and pale and wrapped in a heavy black coat that reached his ankles, and his eyes were sunk deep and glittering, and he ran with his arms already flung wide for an embrace that was going to hurt someone. "Gomez, Morticia, did you bring me anything? Was it a good funeral? Did anyone cry? Was it open casket?" He stopped dead at the bottom of the steps. He had seen Harry. For a moment the bald man simply stared, and Harry, well trained by 4 years of privet drive, made himself smaller and waited to be told to go away. "Who," breathed the bald man, "is this?" "This," said Gomez, sweeping Harry forward with a hand on his thin shoulder, presenting him to the household like a prize, "is Harry. He is joining the family. Harry, this is my brother Fester. Do not let him near the fuse box, the good silver, or your dreams." "A new one," Fester whispered. He crouched down. He and Harry regarded each other, the enormous bald man and the tiny wary boy, and then Fester's whole ruined face split open into the widest, most delighted, most genuine grin Harry had ever been on the receiving end of, and he reached into his own mouth and pulled out a light bulb, which was glowing, warm and gold and steady, all on its own. "Watch this," Fester said, and put it back in, and the glow shone out through his cheeks so that his whole head lit up like a jack-o'-lantern from the inside. Harry laughed. He had not planned to. It came up out of him from somewhere very deep and very disused, cracked and surprised and entirely real, and it rang across the misty lawn, and every Addams within earshot stopped and turned toward the sound the way plants turned toward light. Morticia's pale hand rose to her collarbone. Gomez's cigar paused halfway to his mouth. Wednesday at Harry's side did not smile because she almost never smiled, but she stood a half-inch closer to him, which from Wednesday was the same thing said louder. "Oh," said Fester softly, still lit up, delighted with himself, delighted with the world. "Oh, he's a keeper." They went in out of the rain. The inside of Blackpool Grange was a cathedral built by someone who had loved the idea of a cathedral and then been distracted repeatedly by more interesting ideas. The entrance hall rose 3 stories to a ceiling lost in shadow, hung with cobwebs so vast and architectural that they had clearly been cultivated. A suit of armor stood at the foot of the staircase holding a battle-axe, and as Harry passed it, the visor tipped down and up again in what he chose to believe was a nod. Candles burned everywhere, hundreds of them in black iron branches, and the whole place smelled of beeswax and old stone and something green and growing. On a side table near the door a wooden box sat with its lid open. As Harry watched, a hand climbed out of it. It was a right hand, disembodied at the wrist, quick and clever, and it came up out of the box and balanced on its fingertips on the edge and turned this way and that, considering the newcomer. Harry, to his eternal credit, did not scream. He had learned very young that screaming got you nothing but trouble. Instead he crouched down so that he was at eye level with the hand, if a hand could be said to have an eye, and he held out his own hand, the scraped 4-year-old one, and he said, "Hello, I'm Harry." The hand went very still, then it reached out and it took Harry's fingers and it shook them gravely once. "That's Thing," said Wednesday from the stairs. "He doesn't do that for everyone. He bit the postman on Tuesday and the postman deserved it. He likes you. Thing has excellent judgment. Come up. Grandmama's making supper, and if we're not there she'll make it worse to teach us a lesson." She showed him the house on the way, because a house, in Wednesday's opinion, was a thing you were owed an honest introduction to. This was the library, where the books whispered among themselves at night, and one of them bit if you read it upside down. This was the conservatory where Morticia kept her plants, and Wednesday pointed out a leathery vine with a wide, toothy blossom. "That's Cleopatra, Mother's favorite. Don't feed her your fingers, she'll take the whole arm and Mother scolds." This was the landing where a painted gentleman in a ruff followed you with his eyes. He had murdered 4 wives, been hanged for it, and now considered himself the moral authority of the household, which everyone ignored. And this, at the top of a stair worn hollow by 200 years of Adam's feet, was the corridor where Harry would sleep next to Wednesday at the quiet heart of it all. Harry walked the whole of it, past the murder in the ruff, past the door to nowhere, past the man-eating flower named for a queen, and he was not afraid of any of it, because none of it had ever once pretended to be nice and then hurt him. It said exactly what it was. He had never in his life been anywhere that told him the truth, and the honesty of the terrible old house went into him like warmth into cold hands. Supper at Blackpool Grange was served in a dining room the size of a chapel, at a table long enough to seat 40, lit by a candelabrum that Lurch carried in on his shoulder like a small tree. Grandmama Addams presided over the far end, a tiny bent apparition of a woman with a face like a dried apple and a shawl full of holes, and a wooden spoon she wielded the way a duelist wields a rapier. She had been stirring a black iron pot the size of a bathtub since before the car arrived, and the smell coming off it was rich and strange and not entirely unpleasant, which Harry would learn to recognize as the smell of Grandmama trying something new. "Sit, sit," Grandmama cackled, waving the spoon. "New blood at the table, good, it's been dull. You," she pointed the spoon at Harry, and her black eyes were sharp as pins, and under the sharpness not unkind. "You're a skinny one. Somebody's been starving you, we'll fix that. Nobody starves under this roof, it's undignified. If we want somebody dead we do it properly, with occasion." She ladled something dark and steaming into a bowl and shoved it down the table, and it slid the entire 40 feet and stopped in front of Harry, delivered by a table that had apparently waited its whole life to do exactly this. "Eat." Harry looked at the bowl. He looked around the table. Every face was turned toward him, and not one of them was waiting for him to make a mistake. Morticia sat at Gomez's right hand with her chin resting on her folded fingers, watching him with quiet attention. Gomez had his arm across the back of his wife's chair and an unlit cigar between his teeth and an expression of open, avuncular hope. Fester had propped his chin in both hands. Wednesday sat directly across from Harry, straight-backed, and had not touched her own food, and Harry understood without being told that she was waiting for him, that she would not eat until he did, that this was a courtesy and also a test, and also, in the peculiar grammar of this family, a gift. He picked up the spoon. It was hot, it was salty and dark, and there were things in it he could not identify and did not want to, and it was, without any competition whatsoever, the best thing he had ever eaten, because it was warm and there was as much of it as he wanted, and no one was going to take it away or tell him he hadn't earned it. He ate the whole bowl. He ate a second. Somewhere around the middle of the second bowl the strangest thing happened, which was that Harry stopped watching the door. He did not notice he had done it, but Morticia did. Morticia noticed everything her family did, and she had already decided in the churchyard in the mud the moment he shook Gomez's hand that this half-starved stranger was her family now, as surely as any child she had carried herself, and so she watched him stop watching the door and she reached over without a word and refilled Gomez's wine. And under the table she pressed her foot against her husband's ankle and Gomez met her eyes and neither of them said anything because they didn't need to. "Tell me, Harry," Gomez said, leaning down the table with the warmth of a man who has found a new favorite subject. "What quickens your blood? Swords, dynamite, the tango? Speak freely, my boy. This is a house without judgment, only enthusiasm." Harry, who had never once in his life been asked what he liked, put down his spoon and thought about it with the enormous seriousness of a child handed a responsibility he did not want to drop. "I like when things grow," he said slowly. "In the garden at the Dursleys, I wasn't allowed to touch anything, but I used to look, and sometimes the flowers came out better where I'd looked at them." He glanced up, braced for the usual verdict on his oddness. "Aunt Petunia said I was strange. The table received this the way a congregation receives good news." "Strange," Grandmama repeated, savoring it, tapping her spoon against the pot. "Did you hear that, Tish? The boy makes the flowers come better. Strange, she says." "We shall have to re-educate his vocabulary," Gomez declared. "Harry, in this family, strange is what we say instead of thank you. It is the highest compliment we own. You will be strange here, magnificently, thoroughly strange, and we will love you for every inch of it." Morticia said nothing, but she reached across the corner of the table and set her cool hand briefly over Harry's small one, over the knuckles that had known too many rulers, and Harry looked at the pale fingers resting on his and did not pull away, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. "He'll want a room," Fester said through a mouthful. "Can he have the tower? Please, can he have the tower, the one with the tower flooded," said Wednesday. "There are eels now, even better." "He'll have the room next to mine," Wednesday said in a tone that closed the subject the way a coffin lid closes. "It has a door that connects to mine and I have decided. Pugsley, you may keep your eels." "They're not my eels," Pugsley objected. "They just live here." "Everything in this house just lives here," said Grandmama comfortably, stirring. "That's the trouble with houses." After supper there was an hour Harry would try all his life to describe to people, and fail, because there was no describing it to anyone who had not been inside it. Lurch played the pipe organ that took up the whole west wall of the drawing room, vast and mournful and beautiful, and Gomez danced with Morticia across the flagstones, dipping her low so that her black hair swept the floor, murmuring things in her ear that made her laugh her low three-note laugh. Fester lay on his back on the hearthrug and made the fire change colors by holding his hands over it. Pugsley demonstrated without being asked an explosion, and Wednesday sat with Harry on the bottom step of the great staircase, a little apart from the warmth, which was where Wednesday liked to sit, and she taught him patiently, gravely, how to say his own new name. "Harry Addams," she said. "Harry Addams," he repeated, and the syllables felt enormous in his mouth, too big for him, a coat he would have to grow into. "You don't have to," Wednesday said. She was looking at the fire, not at him. "Have the name, it's yours to take or not. Mother says you can't give someone a family. You can only leave the door open and see if they come in." She turned her head and fixed him with the full weight of her attention, which was considerable, and which she had never before in her life spent on anyone outside her own blood. "I want you to come in. I don't want things, so you should know I mean it." Harry sat with the headless doll in his lap and the warmth of 2 full bowls in his stomach and the strange, enormous house breathing around him, and he thought about the cupboard under the stairs, which had been his whole world 8 hours ago, and which he was never, he understood now, going to see again. "Why me?" he asked. It was the only question he had, and it had been sitting in him for 4 years without a shape, and it came out now small and honest. "You don't even know me. Why would you want me?" Wednesday considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She did not tell him he was special. She gave him instead the truest answer she had, which was also in its way the kindest, because it asked nothing of him. "When I found you," she said, "you were standing perfectly still in the freezing rain, watching a hole in the ground where they were putting a stranger, and you weren't crying, and you weren't complaining, and you weren't going home even though home was right there and warm. You were just watching. Like it was the most interesting thing in the world. That's not normal. Normal children are exhausting. I've observed them. You watched a funeral in the rain because it was more honest than the house behind you." She turned back to the fire. "You're not like them, Harry. You're like us. I knew it the second I saw you. I'm never wrong about the important things, only the small ones." Across the room, Gomez dipped Morticia again, and she laughed, and the organ swelled, and the fire turned from gold to green to a deep and lovely blue under Fester's spread hands. Harry looked at all of it. Then he looked at the girl beside him, the strange, fierce, deadpan girl who had reached into her pocket in a graveyard and given a starving stranger the only treasure she owned. "Okay," he said, "I'll come in." Wednesday nodded once, a single grave nod, the nod of a contract signed, which in a sense it had been. And then something happened that none of them had arranged. Harry, warmer than he could remember being, turned the headless doll over in his fingers. Wednesday had trusted him with her only treasure, and Harry, who had never in his life possessed a single thing worth giving back, wished with the whole ache of him that he could return her better than he had received her. He did not say it. He only thought it and pressed his thumb where a face ought to have been. The doll's hair grew back. It came in black and glossy, sprouting from the shorn plastic scalp and curling down over the blank little head, and where the eyes had been, 2 points of painted blue swam up out of the plastic and opened. Marie Antoinette sat up in Harry's palm. She surveyed the drawing room down the length of a restored and haughty nose, with the expression of a queen who has been kept waiting far too long, and then she went still and was only a doll again, whole now and faintly regal. The organ stopped. Gomez lost the rhythm of the dance and let it go without a murmur. Every pale face in the room turned toward the small, green-eyed newcomer on the stair, and Harry, who had spent 4 years learning precisely what that silence meant in a house, folded himself around the doll and got the words out before anyone else could. "I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. I'll put it back, I'll fix it. Please don't put it back." Fester scrambled up off the hearthrug, scandalized to his core. "Why in the name of everything unholy would you put it back?" "Do it again," said Pugsley with naked and undisguised envy. He mended the ruined, Grandmama whispered from the doorway, her wooden spoon forgotten, one hand pressed to her ancient chest. Grew back what was cut away, with no wand, no words, no bargain struck, and him barely up to the table. Her black eyes came to rest on Morticia, bright as beetles. "Tish, you know what the child is." "I know exactly what he is," Morticia said very softly, and she crossed the flagstones and knelt before Harry as she had knelt in the churchyard mud, and took his frightened face between her cool hands so that he had nowhere to look but at her. "Harry, listen to me. In this house, what you have just done is the loveliest thing anyone has managed all week, and the week is far from over. There's nothing you can do with that gift of yours that will frighten this family, and nothing you can do with it that will ever put you out of doors. If you understand me, you could bring the roof down on all our heads tonight. We would only stand in the ruins and applaud." Wednesday looked at the restored doll and then at Harry, who had restored it, and she said with the flat certainty that in her was the nearest thing to wonder, "I told you, my own kind, I'm never wrong about the important things." Harry sat with a whole doll in his hands and a warmth in his chest he had no word for, and for once, the silence in a room did not mean that he had done something wrong. They put him to bed in the second-best room in the house, which had a black four-poster with curtains like storm clouds and a window that looked out over the family cemetery, and beyond it, the whole dark rolling moor. Morticia tucked the heavy quilt around him with her cool hands and sat on the edge of the bed, and she did not tell him it would all be all right because she never lied to children, and she did not yet know whether it would all be all right, only that she intended to make it so or die in the attempt, and probably not even then. "There are 11 doors between this room and the front of the house," she told him instead, softly in the dark. "2 of them lock. One of them opens onto a room that isn't there anymore. Lurch is at the top of the stairs and he doesn't sleep, and neither, mostly, does Thing. Nothing comes into this house that we don't invite, and no one, Harry, no one at all, will ever again put you outside it." She smoothed the wild black hair back from his forehead from the thin pink scar, and she looked at the scar a moment with her still pale face giving nothing away. "You may keep the light on if you like. Most people do at first. There's no shame in it. The dark takes practice." "I don't mind the dark," Harry said drowsily, sinking into a mattress softer than anything he had ever lain on. "I lived in a cupboard. It was always dark. The dark was the only part that didn't hurt." Morticia went very still. She sat with that sentence, the way one sits with a splinter of glass found in bread, and then she bent and kissed his forehead once, cool and light, exactly on the scar, and she rose in a whisper of black silk. "Then you and the dark are old friends," she said. "How lovely. It will look after you. Good night, my darling." She left the door open a hand's width. Down the corridor, a second door was already open the same amount, and through it Harry could see, in the last of the candlelight, Wednesday Addams sitting up in her own black bed, wide awake, keeping watch over the connecting door with the still patience of a gargoyle, and she would keep it. He would learn every night for a long time until he stopped needing her to, and for a while after that as well, because Wednesday did not do things by halves and she had claimed him, and that was that. Harry Potter, who was going to be Harry Addams, closed his green eyes in the softest bed in the world, in a house that welcomed the dead by name, surrounded by people who had known him one day and had already decided to keep him forever, and that night for once he did not lie awake listening for the sound of the cupboard door. He slept. And in the drawing room, when the children were down and the fire was banked and the last blue flame had guttered out under Fester's hands, Morticia stood at the tall window with her arms folded and looked out at the moor, and Gomez came and stood behind her and wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on her shoulder, and for a while neither of them spoke. "He said the dark was the only part that didn't hurt," Morticia murmured at last. Her voice had not risen. It had, if anything, gone quieter, and Gomez, who had loved this woman a decade and would love her past the grave and out the other side, felt the quiet of it like a change in air pressure before a storm. I heard, he said. Someone did that to him. Someone looked at a small child every morning and decided he would go hungry, decided the cupboard would do. For 4 years, Gomez, while we were dancing. We didn't know, cara mia, we couldn't have known. No, we couldn't. She was silent a moment. Out on the moor, something cried and was answered. But I know now. Gomez tightened his arms around her and pressed his lips to the curve of her neck, and when he spoke there was no lightness left in it at all, only the low fond murder that was, in this family, the truest form of love. Then God help them, he said, wherever they are, and God help anyone else who ever tries. God, said Morticia, watching the dark, will be busy. They stood together at the window a long while, the two of them, the light of one another's lives and the shadow on one another's graves, and behind them the great crooked house held its new sleeping child the way an oyster holds a grain of sand that has hurt it, gently, patiently, already beginning, without anyone deciding to make of him a pearl. Far to the east, in a round office at the top of a distant tower, an old man with a long silver beard sat up late over a delicate silver instrument that had been quietly smoking for 3 years, and frowned at it. He had a plan, and the plan required a certain kind of boy, small, grateful, biddable, grown-up, hungry, and unloved, and starved for a great destiny that only a wise old man could offer him. It was, he had told himself so many times that he had come to believe it, a plan for the greater good. The silver instrument gave a mournful little chime and reported, to anyone who could read it, that the boy it had been set to watch was no longer where he had been left, was no longer in any sense the old man would recognize alone, and was at that precise moment 400 miles away and sound asleep and warm, in the last house on earth where anyone would think to look for the boy who lived. The old man made a note to look into it in the morning. He would be several years too late. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The education of Harry Addams. By the time Harry was 8, he could hit a moving target at 40 paces, name every poisonous plant in the west of England by its Latin binomial, waltz, pick 3 kinds of lock, and fall down a full flight of stairs without spilling a cup of tea. He had also grown 4 inches, filled out at the shoulders, and lost forever the flinch that had once lived in him like a second heartbeat. The cupboard under the stairs had become a story he told, not a place he remembered. He woke now without listening. That was the measure of it, though no one in the house would have thought to measure such a thing. In the early years he had surfaced each morning already braced, cataloguing the sounds of the house for threat before he opened his eyes, a habit worn deep as a cart rut. Somewhere in the 4th year the habit had simply stopped, the way a clock stops when no one remembers to wind it, and he had not noticed its absence until Wednesday remarked over breakfast that he had begun to snore, and that she found this reassuring because only the truly safe snored. Everyone else slept with one ear open. He had gone scarlet, Pugsley had cheered. Gomez had risen from his chair to propose a toast to Harry's adenoids. It was the first compliment Harry had ever been paid for something he did while unconscious, and it remained quietly among his favorites. The morning it began was a Tuesday, which at Blackpool Grange meant archery. Stand still, Pugsley, said Wednesday. Pugsley stood still. He was tied to the target, which was a straw-stuffed effigy of a tax collector that Grandmama had made years ago and repaired lovingly after every use, and he wore an expression of round-faced contentment because being tied to things was among his favorite ways to spend a morning. An apple sat balanced on his head. Wednesday had insisted on the apple. Wednesday believed in tradition. Harry goes first, Pugsley said generously. He's the guest. Harry hasn't been a guest for 4 years, Wednesday said. He's family, which is why he goes second. Guests you let win. Harry took the longbow from the rack, tested the string against his cheek, and considered the apple across the misty length of the north lawn. Dew stood on the grass in a silver sheet. Somewhere in the family cemetery a raven was complaining about something at length to nobody. He drew, breathed out, and loosed. The arrow crossed the lawn in a low singing arc and took the apple cleanly off Pugsley's head, pinning it to the tax collector's straw shoulder behind him. Pugsley beamed, right through the core. You've been practicing. He splits it every time now, Wednesday said, and there was something in her flat voice that in another child would have been described as satisfaction, the private satisfaction of a craftsman watching an apprentice surpass the lesson. She knocked her own arrow. The trouble is he still aims. You shouldn't aim. Aiming is for people who doubt. You should simply decide where the arrow is going to be, and then it is there, and the flight of the arrow is a formality the universe performs to catch up with your intention. She loosed without appearing to look. Her arrow buried itself in the exact spot the apple had occupied a moment before, quivering. That is how you shoot. That is also how you should live. It saves an enormous amount of time. Harry retrieved the arrows, freed Pugsley, and thought about that, because he had learned that when Wednesday said something in that particular tone, she was usually saying 2 things and only bothering to explain one. Then he decided the second arrow should be back in the quiver, and it was, and Wednesday turned her head and regarded him with the still attention she gave to very few things in the world. Do that again, she said. He did it again. The arrow lifted itself off the wet grass, drifted across the yard in no hurry at all, and settled into the quiver with a soft wooden click. It was not much, as tricks went. It was the kind of thing that happened around Harry now the way weather happened, small displacements in the ordinary order of objects, a teacup filling itself when he was thirsty, a candle relighting when he glanced at the wick. 4 years in a house that treated his strangeness as a talent rather than a symptom had done to Harry what water does to a stone in a stream bed. It had not changed what he was, only worn away everything that had been clenched around it. "You're getting stronger," Wednesday observed. She did not say it as a warning. In the Addams household, getting stronger was simply what one did, like getting taller, and both were to be encouraged with cake. "Grandmama says I'll be able to raise the dead by the time I'm 12, Harry said. "She's very excited. She wants to be first." She would. Wednesday collected the tax collector under one arm to carry him back to the shed. "Mother says your kind of magic is the old kind, the kind that comes up out of the ground and through the blood, not the kind you learn out of a book with a stick in your hand." She said kind of magic without inflection, exactly as she said all things, but Harry had spent 4 years learning to read the small print under her voice. "She says there are people who do it the other way, whole schools of them. They think they invented it. Do you believe her?" "I believe everything my mother says," said Wednesday. "It's the only superstition I permit myself." The fencing Sal was in the old ballroom, where Gomez had long ago pulled up the parquet in a fit of enthusiasm and never gotten around to putting it back, so that they fought on bare stone under a chandelier missing most of its crystals. Gomez fenced as he did everything, which was to say as though his life depended on it, and he found the fact delightful. He came at Harry in a whirl of black and steel, laughing, the unlit cigar clamped in his teeth, and Harry gave ground and then stopped giving ground. "Ha, there it is," Gomez cried, delighted, as Harry's blade slid past his guard and stopped a precise inch from his heart. "You felt me commit and you took the line. Beautiful, my boy, beautiful. You have your father's wrist." Harry lowered the foil. He had heard this before, and it never landed the same way twice, and he had never worked out whether Gomez meant James Potter, whom Harry could not remember, or himself, whom Harry saw every single day at the head of the breakfast table. He had come to suspect Gomez did not distinguish between the two, and that this was on purpose, and that it was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for him. "You're not angry when you fight," Gomez said, pulling off his mask, mopping his brow, pouring them both something dark from a decanter that lived on the mantel. "I've noticed, most men fight angry. Anger makes you predictable. It hands your enemy a rope and tells him which end to pull." He touched his glass to Harry's. "You fight happy. That's rarer, that's harder to beat. A happy man has nothing to prove and nothing to lose, and there's no more dangerous animal in all the world. Remember that." "It's the only advice I have that Morticia hasn't given you better. Mother says the most dangerous animal in the world is a patient woman," Harry offered. "Your mother," Gomez said, with the reverence of a man discussing whether that could kill you, "is correct. She's always correct. Once in Buenos Aires I bet her she was wrong. I was wrong about her being wrong. It's the finest money I ever lost." He refilled their glasses and told, because Gomez could no more resist a story than a match can resist a fuse, the one about the night he and Morticia had been married on the lip of an active volcano by a defrocked bishop who owed him a favor, and how the lava had risen just far enough to singe the hem of her gown, and how she had regarded the approaching molten death without a flicker and remarked only that the lighting was flattering. Harry had heard it a dozen times. He asked every time the same questions in the same places, not because he had forgotten the answers, but because the asking was part of it, as the responses at a service are part of it, a liturgy of belonging. He understood now that this was what families were for. They told the same stories until the stories became a kind of house you could carry with you, and he had more of that house in him every year, layered like rings in a tree, and no one could cut it out of him without cutting down the whole tree. The whole tree, he had discovered, was remarkably hard to cut down. He clapped Harry on the shoulder. "Come, she's in the conservatory and she asked for you specifically, and when Morticia asks for you specifically, you go quickly, and you count yourself among the fortunate men of the earth." Morticia was in the conservatory, among the black orchids and the drowsing Venus traps and the great snapping vine named Cleopatra, who lifted a lazy blossom to nuzzle Harry's ear as he came in, having decided long ago that Harry was not food. The air was warm and thick and green, and smelled of turned earth and crushed nightshade. Morticia stood at the potting bench with her sleeves pushed back and her pale hands buried to the wrist in soil, and she did not turn around because she had known Harry was coming before Gomez did. "Come here, my darling," she said. "I want to show you something, and I want you to fail at it, so pay attention." On the bench lay a rose. It was dead, not wilted, not fading, but thoroughly and finally dead, the petals gone brown and papery, the stem the color of ash. Morticia laid Harry's hand over it, her cool fingers folding his around the crisp ruin of the flower. "Bring it back," she said. Harry reached for the place inside himself that the magic lived, the warm green pull behind his breastbone, and he pushed as he did at the arrows. The rose shuddered. A little color crept up the stem, then it stopped and browned again and crumbled, and a single dry petal broke off and drifted to the bench, and Harry let out a breath. Good, Morticia said. You failed. Do you know why? Because it's really dead, not like the doll. The doll was only broken. Because it is really dead. She began without hurry to pot a cutting, her hands moving in the black soil with the certainty of long love. Death is not a lock you can pick, Harry, though your grandmother will tell you otherwise, and one day she may even be right because she cheats. What you did to Marie Antoinette, what you do to arrows and teacups, that is not raising the dead. That is asking the world very politely to remember how a thing was a moment ago, and the world is willing to remember a great deal if you ask it kindly and it likes you. It does not remember all the way back to alive, not for anyone, not yet. She glanced at him, and her pale eyes held his. I tell you this because you are strong, and you are getting stronger, and strong young people who are never told what they cannot do go looking for the edge of it in the dark alone, and are surprised by what they find there. I would rather show you the edge myself in the daylight with tea. Harry looked at the crumbled rose. The people who do magic the other way, out of books, do they know where the edge is? Something passed across Morticia's still face, gone before it fully arrived. Some of them believe there is no edge, she said. Which is a different thing from there not being one. Those are the ones to be careful of, my love, not the ones who fear death, the ones who have decided not to. She wiped her hands on a cloth and cupped his face, and the smell of soil was on her fingers, and she looked at him a long moment with the whole of her serene attention. You are not one of those. You brought a doll back its face because you wanted to give a little girl a better gift than she gave you. That is the entire difference. Never lose it. It is worth more than all the power in the ground. Yes, mother, Harry said, and he meant it, and she saw that he meant it, and that was the end of the lesson. The afternoon between the conservatory and the coming of the county belonged, as most afternoons did, to Uncle Fester, who had promised to teach the boys something useful, and had therefore led them down 4 flights of stairs to the part of the cellar the family did not mention to insurance men. Fester's laboratory occupied what had once been the Grange's wine cellar, and was now something between an operating theater and a thunderstorm that had been asked politely to remain indoors. Copper coils climbed the walls to a ceiling stained with the ghosts of former experiments. Jars of things floated in other things. A brass diving helmet sat on the bench beside a birdcage that held a single luminous moth, which Fester loved more sincerely than he loved most of his relatives, and had named Gerald. In the center of the room, chained to the floor and humming to itself, stood the machine. Behold, said Fester, flinging out both arms so that his coat billowed and his sunken eyes caught the light of 40 gauges at once, the reanimator. Harry beheld it. It was enormous in copper and studded with dials, and 2 black cables ran from its flanks up to a storm glass fixed in the ceiling, and it smelled powerfully of ozone and ambition. What does it do? Harry asked, because someone had to. It restores life to the lifeless, Fester breathed. It hauls the departed back across the veil. It wrestles the reaper to the cellar floor and makes him give up what he took. He paused, and honesty tugged at him because he was, under everything, a truthful soul. So far it has made toast, superb toast, the finest toast in the west of England, but that is not, I feel, the outer limit of its ambitions. Pugsley, who had heard this speech many times and adored it on each occasion, was already clambering onto a stool to reach the master switch. Can I do the lever? You let me do the lever last time. Last time you did the lever we lost the east chimney and Gerald's brother. That was a good day, said Pugsley with reverence. Fester's whole face softened because it had been a good day and because he could deny the child nothing, and he flapped a permissive hand. The lever, gently, on my mark. Harry, stand there on the rubber square, unless you prefer your hair did something memorable for a week. The subject of the day's resurrection was a bouquet of black roses, 3 days dead, that Morticia had thrown out of the conservatory and Fester had rescued from the compost with the tenderness of a man saving orphans. He laid them in the copper cradle at the machine's heart and clamped them down and adjusted a dial with the delicacy of a safecracker. The humming climbed. The storm glass in the ceiling began to flicker with captive lightning, blue and unhappy. On my mark, Fester said. 3, 2, consider your souls. 1, mark. Pugsley threw the lever. The reanimator screamed. Light poured down the black cables in a torrent. The whole cellar went white and then violet. The diving helmet fell off the bench and rolled in a circle. Gerald the moth performed several laps of his cage in what may have been terror or applause, and a smell rose up that was the smell of every storm that had ever considered the sea. The lightning died, smoke curled. In the copper cradle, warm and golden and perfectly browned, lay 4 slices of toast. There was a silence. Butter, Pugsley suggested. It's getting closer, Fester said stoutly, though his shoulders had come down an inch. He lifted the toast out and regarded it without appetite. It used to be bread, untoasted, raw. Now it toasts. That is a refinement. That is progress. I refuse to be a man who cannot see progress. He set the toast aside and looked for a moment at the dead roses still lying in the cradle, unraised, unbudged, browner than before, and something crossed his glittering face that Harry had learned to recognize even on faces built to hide it, because it had once lived on his own. It was the particular ache of wanting a thing very much and for a very long time and getting toast instead. Harry stepped off the rubber square. Can I try something? He said. He picked up the black roses. They crumbled a little in his hands, dry as old letters. He did not reach for the machine. He reached for the warm green place behind his breastbone, the one his mother had shown him in the daylight with tea, and he thought without pushing, without demanding, only asking about how the roses had been 3 days ago when they were merely dying and not yet gone, how the petals had held their weight, how the stems had drunk the light. He asked the world very politely to remember. The world which liked him remembered. Color climbed the stems the way tide climbs a beach. The papery petals swelled and darkened and turned satin, and one by one the roses lifted their heads out of death and opened, black and enormous and faintly, impossibly, damp with a dew that had evaporated 3 days before. They were not alive. Morticia had told him where the edge was, and he had not crossed it. But they were as close to alive as remembering could carry them, and they would stay that way, she had said, for as long as he cared to hold the memory, and Harry found that he cared to hold it quite a while. He held them out to his uncle. Fester did not take them at once. Fester, who had chained lightning to his cellar floor and lost chimneys in the pursuit of exactly this, looked at the black roses blooming in the hands of an 8-year-old and did not say anything for a stretch of time that was, for Fester, geologically long. 40 years, he said at last, very quietly, all the boom gone out of him. 40 years I've been down here with the cables and the lightning and the gauges hauling on the door, and you just asked it to open. He took the roses then, gathered them to his chest, buried his bald face in them, breathed them in. When he lifted his head, his sunken eyes were wet, and he was grinning, and both of those things were completely true at once, which was the most Addams thing in the world. Don't ever tell your grandmother, I cried. She'll want to know why, and I'll have to explain that a child made me happy, and she'll say I've gone soft, and she'll be right, and I'll have to poison her soup as a matter of principle, and then he'll make the toast. He clapped a heavy hand on Harry's shoulder, and it landed like a blessing shaped like a brick. You beautiful, strange boy. You are the best experiment this cellar has ever run, and I didn't even build you. Somebody upstairs did. I'm going to keep you charged for 100 years. You can't keep me charged, Uncle Fester, Harry said. I'm not a bulb. Everyone's a bulb, said Fester deeply, if you love them enough, and he put the roses in a jar of graveyard water where they would live on Harry's windowsill for a month, refusing to fade, until the whole household had stopped being surprised by them and started being proud. Grandmama came down while they were sweeping up the last of the storm, drawn by the ozone as she was drawn to any smell that suggested something had nearly died. She inspected the toast, ate a slice without asking, pronounced it acceptable, and then caught sight of the roses in Harry's arms and went still in the way the old woman went still only rarely, when the folk which in her looked out from under the cook. You did that, she said. It was not a question. She took Harry's chin in one gnarled hand and turned his face to the lamplight and studied it, the green eyes, the thin scar, the whole of him, with an attention that had nothing childlike left in it. Raising at 8, not raising, remembering, which is worse in a way. Raising takes strength, remembering takes wanting, and wanting is bottomless, and a bottomless thing is harder to teach a child to close. She let go of his chin. You listen to me, Sprout. There are men in the world who do our work the tidy way, with wands and Latin and rules written in books by committees. They'll find you one day. Your mother knows it, and I know it, and we don't say it at the table because it spoils the digestion. When they come, they'll want to put you in a box with a label on it, a house, a destiny, a nice clean story about a chosen boy. She jabbed a finger into his chest. You remember whose kitchen you were raised in. You remember that we don't do labels in this family. We do people. You're not a chosen anything. You're chosen us, and we chose you, and there's no committee on earth that outranks a family that picked you up out of the rain. Now carry that pot up for me before my arms remember they're 200 years old. Harry carried the pot up. It weighed nearly as much as he did, and something in it kept trying to push the lid off from the inside, and he held it against his chest the whole 4 flights and did not let it win, and that, more than the fencing or the archery or the roses, was the lesson of the afternoon, though nobody wrote it on a clipboard. The day was not done because it had a visitor coming, and the visitor was at that moment lost on the moor road, cursing his map. His name was Mr. Fenimore Crisp, and he worked for the county, and he had a clipboard, and he believed in the clipboard the way the Addamses believed in the grave. He had come about the children. There were, according to the county's records, at least 2 children of school-age resident at the address known as Blackpool Grange, and possibly a third, the third being a matter of some administrative confusion, since the third child had appeared in no register of births, no adoption filed with any office Mr. Crisp could find, and yet featured in a single alarming report from a retired census-taker who had visited the property once in 1986. And taken early retirement immediately afterward. None of these children had ever attended a day of school. Letters had gone unanswered. A truancy officer had been dispatched the previous spring and had sent back a single postcard reading I resign, and then in smaller letters underneath, the hand. Mr. Crisp did not know what the hand meant. Mr. Crisp was about to find out. He arrived at dusk, which was the Grange's best hour, when the mist came up out of the bog and the house lit itself window by window and the whole crooked silhouette looked like something deciding whether to eat you. He parked his little county car at the bottom of the drive, walked up past the family cemetery, read welcome on the gate and rest in pieces on the first stone, made a note on his clipboard and knocked. The door was opened by Lurch. Lurch filled the doorway the way a total eclipse fills the sky. He looked down at Mr. Crisp from a very great height and produced, after a thoughtful pause, a sound like a cathedral clearing its throat. "MMMRRRR, ah," said Mr. Crisp, consulting his clipboard for courage. "Good evening, Fenimore Crisp, County Education Welfare. I'm here regarding the schooling of the minor children resident at this address. I'll need to speak with a parent or guardian and to see the children themselves, and I should warn you that obstruction of an education welfare officer is an offense under the—" "Do come in," said Morticia, materializing at the top of the hall in a column of black, her voice unrolling down the length of the stone floor like a carpet laid for a guest. "You're just in time, we're about to have someone for dinner." Mr. Crisp came in. Later he would not be able to say why. There had been something in how she said dinner. They sat him in the drawing room in a chair that was almost, but not quite, too comfortable, and Thing brought him tea on a silver tray, and Mr. Crisp watched a disembodied hand pour milk into his cup with a steady grace no butler could match, and he made a note on his clipboard, and his handwriting was not entirely his own anymore. "You have children who have never been to school," he said, and was pleased to hear that his voice mostly worked. "3 of them, we have 3 children," Morticia agreed, arranging herself on the divan, "and they have never been to school. No, we teach them at home. My husband handles languages, mathematics, and the sword. My mother-in-law covers the natural sciences, cookery, and communion with the departed. I take the humanities, botany, and posture. And the children teach each other, which is where the real education happens, as I'm sure a man of your evident learning appreciates." "There are standards," said Mr. Crisp. "A curriculum, certain competencies every child in the county must demonstrate, reading, arithmetic. I'll need to assess whether—" "Pugsley," Morticia called without raising her voice. Pugsley trotted in. He was carrying, cradled in both arms with a chemist's tenderness, a glass flask of something that fizzed a color that has no name and stained the retina. "Mr. Crisp would like to assess your competencies," Morticia said. "Tell him what you're working on." "Nitrogen triiodide," Pugsley said happily. "But I can't get it to keep. It goes off if you look at it too hard. I've had to reglaze my window 9 times. He considered. "Do you want to see it go off? You have to look at it hard." "That won't be necessary," said Mr. Crisp, in the high voice of a man who has just done some arithmetic of his own and not liked the answer. "Wednesday," said Morticia. "Mr. Crisp is interested in reading." Wednesday drifted in and fixed the education welfare officer with her flat black stare, and Mr. Crisp discovered that being looked at by Wednesday Addams was like being read your own eulogy by someone who had helped write it. "I'm reading a history of the Spanish Inquisition," she informed him. "In the original Spanish, it's disappointing. The author keeps apologizing. When I write mine, there will be no apologies and better diagrams." She tilted her head a precise degree. "You have a mole on your neck that has changed shape since you sat down. You should have it looked at. I'd start soon. I've read a great deal about moles." She had not particularly, but she had learned that the specific threat and the vague threat did different work, and she liked to keep both in the drawer. Mr. Crisp's hand went to his neck. "And the 3rd child," he managed. "The records mention a 3rd, a boy, no birth certificate, no filed adoption, nothing." He tapped the clipboard and a little of the county came back into him, because paperwork was the one place Mr. Crisp had ever been brave. "I'm afraid an undocumented child is a very serious matter, very serious indeed. There would have to be an investigation, interviews, possibly a removal, pending." The temperature of the room did not change. That was the strange part, the part Mr. Crisp would try to explain to his wife later and give up on. The temperature did not change, and yet everyone in the county car park of his soul suddenly wanted to be somewhere else. Morticia had not moved. She was still arranged on the divan with her hands folded, serene, lovely, attentive, and she was looking at him now with an interest she had not shown before, the specific interest of a spider who has felt a particular thread go tight. "His name is Harry," she said softly. "He is our son. Say the word removal again, Mr. Crisp." "I want to be certain I heard you." Into this, through the drawing-room door, walked Harry himself, 8 years old, wind in his black hair from the roof where he'd been sitting with the ravens, green eyes bright, and he took in the scene at a glance as he took in everything now, and he smiled at the visitor, and it was a warm and open and genuinely friendly smile, and it was somehow the most unsettling thing that had happened to Mr. Crisp all evening. "Hello," Harry said. "You must be from the county." "I'm the undocumented one." He crossed the room and sat on the arm of his mother's divan, easy, unhurried, entirely at home, and Mr. Crisp noticed that the frightening pale woman's hand had come to rest on Harry's knee and that Harry had covered it with his own without either of them appearing to think about it. "I heard the word removal. I wouldn't, honestly, for your sake, not because of anything I'd do." He said it kindly, helpfully, the way you'd warn a man his shoelace was untied. "I'm the reasonable one in this family. I'm the one who talks people out of things. You want to stay on my side of the negotiation." Mr. Crisp looked at the green-eyed child and at the woman and at the girl with the eulogy eyes and at the round one holding a flask of something that ate windows and at the disembodied hand that had just refilled his tea and at the 8-foot butler filling the doorway behind him, and he came all at once to a decision that felt less like cowardice than like sudden wisdom. He looked down at his clipboard, he turned to a fresh page, and in a small, careful, deeply relieved hand, Fenimore Crisp of the County Education Welfare Office wrote, "Home education satisfactory, all children thriving, no further action required." He underlined thriving twice. "Well," he said, standing, "everything appears to be in excellent order, truly excellent. Your son is a credit to you, all of them, delightful family. I'll just close the file." He was moving toward the door as he spoke, and Lurch stepped aside to let him pass with a courtly incline of the head that nearly finished the job the tea had started. "No need to see me out, I know the way, I'll never forget the way." They watched his little county car reverse down the drive at a speed the county did not officially sanction, its headlights swinging wild across the cemetery, and vanish into the moor. "He seemed nice," said Pugsley. "He seemed edible," said Grandmamma, who had appeared in the doorway to watch the fun, wiping her hands on her apron. "Shame. Ah well, there'll be another, there's always another. The county breeds them like flies." She cackled and shuffled off toward the kitchen, from which, a moment later, came the sound of something being enthusiastically minced. Harry stayed on the arm of the divan with his hand over his mother's. Morticia had not moved through the whole of it, and she did not move now, but she turned her head and looked at him, and there was a question in it. "You spoke for the family," she said. "You put yourself between us and the man from the county. You made him afraid of what it would cost him to hurt you, and then you gave him a door out and he took it, and no one had to bury anyone. Where did you learn to do that?" "From you," Harry said. "All of it, the being frightening part and the giving them a door part. You do it every day. You did it to Uncle Vernon at the very beginning. I was 4, I remember. You made him relieved to give me away and grateful to you for taking me." He looked at their joined hands. "I used to think the scariest thing in the world was a grown-up deciding they didn't want you. Then I came here, and I found out the scariest thing in the world is my mother deciding she does." Morticia Addams had buried a great many things in her long, strange life, and she had wept at exactly none of the funerals, because she did not believe in wasting water on the departed who could no longer appreciate it. She did not weep now, but she lifted Harry's hand and pressed her cool lips to his knuckles once over the old faint scars, and she held it there a moment longer than a kiss requires, and Harry understood that he had been thanked in the deepest currency the woman owned. "Go and wash for dinner, my darling," she said. "Your grandmother is making something with opinions. It's better to eat it before it develops any more of them." Later, when the house had gone dark and full and quiet, Harry climbed out of his window and up the ivy to the flat lead roof between the 2 crooked towers, because that was where you went at Blackpool Grange when you needed the whole sky, and he found, as he always found, that he was not the first one there. Wednesday sat at the roof's edge with her legs hanging over a 60-foot drop and a book she was not reading closed in her lap, watching the moon come and go behind fast clouds. She did not look around. She had heard him coming since the ivy. She always heard him coming. "You handled the county man well," she said. "I was going to poison his tea. Yours was better, bloodless. I'm learning to appreciate bloodless, slowly, under protest." Harry sat down beside her close, their shoulders not quite touching, the way they had sat since he was 4 and she was 5, and neither of them had ever needed to say why. Out on the moor a fox screamed and was answered, and the ravens muttered in the cemetery below. "Can I ask you something?" he said, "and you won't be weird about it." "I am always weird about everything," Wednesday said. "It's the only promise I keep, but ask. That first day, in the graveyard. You gave me Marie Antoinette before you knew anything about me. You'd never lent her to anyone. Your mum told me later you cried when Fester borrowed her for a magic trick and you were 3. Harry watched the moon. "Why me? You never actually said. You said I watched a funeral like it was interesting. But that's not a reason to give a stranger the only thing you love." Wednesday was quiet for a while. On the roof at night was the only place and time she ever answered questions like this, and Harry had learned not to fill the silence, because filling the silence was how you frightened off the truth. "When I was small," she said at last, "before you, I used to think I was the only one, not the only Addams, the only me. Everyone in this house is strange, but they're strange and happy about it, strange out loud, strange like a party. I'm strange the other way, quiet, cold. I look at a sunset and I think about how far the light had to travel to die on my face. I look at people being happy and I understand it the way you understand a language you don't speak." She turned the closed book over in her hands. "My family loves me completely and they don't understand me at all, and those are 2 different things, and I had made my peace with only ever having the first one. And then there was a starving boy standing perfectly still in the rain, watching a stranger's funeral, not crying, not leaving, just watching, because it was the truest thing available to look at." She finally turned her head and looked at him, her flat black eyes catching the moon, and I recognized it, the quiet, the cold, the watching. I saw someone strange the way I'm strange, and I had never seen that before, not once, not in the whole grim parade of the world, and I decided in that exact second that I was not going to let the rain have you, or the tidy house, or the county, or anyone. "You're not my brother, Harry. Pugsley is my brother. I love him. He explodes things and he's warm and he's ordinary in the way even Addamses can be ordinary." She looked back at the moon. "You're my own kind. There's a difference." I've spent 5 years being certain of it. I'm never wrong about the important things. Harry sat with that on the roof of the falling-down house that had caught him, under a moon that kept dying and coming back, next to the strange fierce girl who had claimed him out of the rain when he was 4 and had never once let go, and he did not say anything for a long time because some things you damage by answering. Only the small ones, he said finally. What? You're never wrong about the important things. Only the small ones. You always say the whole sentence. You left off the end. Wednesday almost smiled. She did not, because she almost never did, but on the roof, in the dark, where no one could hold her to it, the corner of her mouth moved a bare degree, and Harry saw it because he always saw it, and neither of them mentioned it because that was the arrangement. Come on, she said, standing, offering him her cold hand to pull him up from the edge. It's late. Grandmama's thing is probably conscious by now. If we don't eat it before midnight, it starts to negotiate. Far away in the village that would not admit to knowing where the Grange was, a stranger had been asking questions again. He had asked at the post office and the public house and the little shop, an old man, courteous, silver-bearded, with a way of looking at you over his spectacles that made you want to tell him things. He had asked about a family on the moor. He had asked, in particular, whether anyone had ever seen a boy with black hair and green eyes and a mark on his forehead. The village had told him, as the village told everyone, that there was no family on the moor, that there had never been a house out there, that he must be thinking of somewhere else. And the old man had thanked them kindly and bought a lemon sherbet and walked out into the dusk, and he had not believed a word of it, and he had gone away to think, and to wait, and to plan, because he had a great deal of patience, and he had been told by an instrument that never lied that the boy he needed was alive somewhere in this green wet country, and getting stronger and utterly beyond his reach. For now, Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, the letter. The first owl arrived at breakfast on the morning of Harry's 11th birthday, and things shot it out of the air with a candlestick before anyone had finished their eggs. Lurch, said Morticia without looking up from her correspondence, there's a bird in the soup tureen. Lurch retrieved the bird. It was a tawny owl, indignant but unhurt, and it had a letter tied to its leg, and it glared around the breakfast table at the assembled Addamses with the specific outrage of a professional who has been ambushed on a routine delivery. Things sat on the tablecloth beside the marmalade, flexing, ready for a second attempt. 3 more came before the eggs were cold. The second owl thing allowed to land, on the strict condition that it surrender its letter and depart, which it did, ruffled and muttering. The third, a great gray thing with an air of middle management, circled the dining room twice, inspecting the Dacre, and left of its own accord, apparently to file a complaint. The fourth arrived, settled on the antlers of the stuffed something over the fireplace, and refused all instruction, and Gomez fell instantly and completely in love with it, named it Fitzgerald, and fed it kippers. It lived at Blackpool Grange for the rest of its natural life and bit everyone except Gomez, whom it worshipped. Nobody could ever recall afterward what its letter had said. It had probably been important. Don't shoot the next one thing, Harry said, retrieving the letter. They're only messengers. Look, it's addressed to me. It was addressed to him. It was addressed to him in emerald green ink on heavy yellowish parchment in a hand of considerable elegance, and the address read, Mr. H. Addams, the second best bedroom, Blackpool Grange, the moor. How do they know which bedroom? Pugsley demanded, scandalized. That's private, that's surveillance. It's rather good surveillance, Wednesday said, reading over Harry's shoulder with an expression that had sharpened by a degree. They know the house, they know the room, they know he sleeps in the second best one, which means they know Wednesday sleeps in the best one, which means they know more about the geography of this family than the county ever managed, and the county sent 4 men in a helicopter. She looked at her mother. That's not a school. Schools send forms. That's an intelligence service that also teaches Latin. Harry broke the wax seal, which bore a coat of arms quartered among a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a serpent, and he unfolded the letter, and he read it aloud, because at Blackpool Grange nothing worth reading was read silently. Dear Mr. Addams, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on the 1st of September. We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. He turned the page over. It's signed Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. There's a list. It wants a wand. 2 of them actually know. 1 wand, robes, a cauldron, pewter standard size 2, a telescope, and I'm allowed a toad, a cat, or an owl, but not, and I quote, a rat, a raven, or anything venomous. A profound silence settled over the breakfast table. No venomous, Grandmama repeated, in the voice of a woman who has just been personally insulted by a stranger's will. No venomous. And what, pray, are we meant to do with the boy? Send him off to school with a cat, she said, kept the way most people said tapeworm. In my day, a witch went to nothing at all, because there was nothing to go to, and she learned her craft off her grandmother in a cave, and she was grateful, and she certainly didn't leave the venomous at home like a pair of galoshes. It's a British school, Mother, said Gomez, who had picked up the equipment list and was reading it with the mounting delight of a man discovering a menu in a restaurant he has always wanted to try. They have rules. I find it charming. Look at this. First years are not permitted their own broomsticks. broomsticks, cara mia, they fly, an entire nation of them, up in the air on furniture, and they've written a rule about it, which means it happens often enough to legislate. He clasped the list to his chest. Harry, my boy, you must go, you simply must. Think of the duels. Nobody said he isn't going, Morticia observed. She had set down her own correspondence at last, and she was looking at the green-inked letter in Harry's hands with an attention that had gone very still and very deep, the attention she reserved for the 2 or 3 genuinely important things that had happened in the course of her life, most of which had also arrived at this table. But I would like to know how a school in Scotland comes to be writing my son's name on a bedroom he has slept in for 7 years, and I would like to know it before he answers them. Harry, my darling, read me the ink again. Dear Mr. Addams, Harry read, not the words, the ink. Morticia rose and came around the table and took the parchment and held it up to the gray window light, and the emerald ink caught it and glowed, and something in her face closed like a hand. This was written a long time ago, do you see? The ink is set, it has aged. Every child in Britain born 11 years ago has had their name written into a book on the day they were born, and their letter written soon after, and it has sat in a drawer in Scotland all this while, waiting for the day it would be sent. She lowered the parchment. They have been expecting you, Harry, since before we found you, since before you could walk. There is a machine in that castle that has had your name in it your whole life, and this is the first morning it has been allowed to act on it, and I find I would very much like to know why it waited and who told it to. Far to the north, on the same gray morning, in a circular office at the top of a spiraling tower, an old man stood at a high window and watched a phoenix preen itself in the thin sunlight and did not enjoy the view. Albus Dumbledore had not slept. This was not in itself remarkable. He had reached the age at which sleep came as an occasional guest rather than a nightly tenant, and he had learned to fill the small hours with the endless quiet arithmetic of his responsibilities. But last night the arithmetic had refused to balance, as it had refused to balance for 7 years now, ever since the morning the little silver instruments on his shelf had begun to sing a note he did not recognize and could not silence. The instruments told him the boy lived, that much they had never stopped saying. Harry Potter was alive, the blood that ran in him ran somewhere in the world, warm and beating. But the instrument that should have told him where, the delicate silver device keyed to the protection he had woven around the house on Privet Drive, had gone dark on a wet afternoon in Harry's 4th year, and it had never lit again. And when Dumbledore had at last gone himself to that tidy street and knocked on that tidy door, he had found Petunia Dursley grey-faced and evasive, and her husband loudly, aggressively certain that they had never had a nephew, no nephew at all. And if there had been a nephew, he had gone to a very good home, a legal home, all signed and proper, and they would thank the old man to stop frightening the neighbors. He had used a gentle legilimency on them there on the doorstep because the stakes were what they were. He had seen the tall, pale woman who did not blink. He had seen the man with the cigar and the fencer's eyes. He had seen a small girl with black braids saying we'd like to keep him, and a solicitor's letter thick as a hymnal, and Vernon Dursley's overwhelming, shameful relief. And he had seen at the very bottom of Petunia's memory, half buried under her fear, the name of the family that had taken the boy who lived, and the name had meant nothing to him at all, which had frightened him more than anything else, because Albus Dumbledore knew the name of every old magical family in Britain and most of the ones abroad, and this one he had never heard. Addams, he had spent 7 years finding out. It had been slow and it had been careful because he could tell no one. If it became known that the boy who lived had vanished from his protection and been raised, unwatched and unguided, by an unknown foreign family of evident and considerable strangeness, the questions would have been endless and the answers ruinous. So he had searched alone in the margins of his other duties, and what he had learned had not comforted him. The Addamses were old. Older than the Blacks, older than the Gaunts, older by centuries than the ministry that did not know they existed, because they had never once applied to it for anything. They were not, in the ordinary sense, wizards. They did not carry wands. They had never sat an examination or registered a birth or paid a tax or attended a school. Their magic was the deep kind, the kind that predated institutions, the kind that had been driven underground everywhere else and had, in this one lineage, simply declined to go. And they had taken Harry Potter out of the rain when he was 4 years old and closed around him like a fist, and Dumbledore could not reach him, could not watch him, could not shape him, and had been reduced for 7 years to the single cold comfort of an instrument that said only alive, alive, alive. He had told himself it was for the greater good. He had told himself many things over the years, and he had believed most of them, because a man who cannot believe his own reasons cannot get out of bed, and Dumbledore had always, whatever else, gotten out of bed. The plan had been sound, it remained sound. The prophecy was clear on the essential point, and the essential point was terrible, and it required a particular kind of boy. One who had known what it was to be unloved so that he would understand what he fought for, one who had known what it was to be small so that power would not spoil him. One who would, when the hour came and the truth of what he carried was finally shown to him, be willing to walk into the dark and lay his life down for a world that had given him nothing, because that was what the prophecy asked in the end, and a happy, cherished, well-defended child does not walk willingly into the dark. Dumbledore had needed a lamb. He had arranged, with great care and no small grief, for a lamb. The Addamses, the little he had learned of them, did not raise lambs. He turned from the window. On his desk lay the duplicate of the letter that had gone out that morning, and beside it a second sheet blank on which he had been meaning for an hour to write instructions to Minerva. He had decided at last in the gray small hours that he could not go himself. To go himself would be to declare the matter important, and importance draws eyes, and there were eyes in his own castle he did not yet trust. Minerva would go. Minerva was stern and fair and unimaginative in the specific way that made her incorruptible, and she would deliver the letter and assess the boy and report back, and she would not understand what she was looking at, and that was, for the moment, exactly what he needed. He dipped his quill. He wrote, Minerva, a delicate matter and an old debt of mine come due. I must ask you to make a house call. Then he sat for a long moment with the quill in his hand, an old man alone in a high round room, and he allowed himself, as he rarely did, to be afraid. Because for 7 years Harry Potter had been a hole in his plans shaped exactly like a boy, and today the hole had a school letter in its hand, and tomorrow it would have a face, and Albus Dumbledore had learned across a long and terrible life that the things you cannot see coming are the things that undo you, and he could not, however he strained, see this one coming at all. They told Harry the truth that evening, because Morticia would not send him to bed on a day like this without it, and because she had decided, watching him read the green ink aloud at breakfast, that the school in Scotland must not be the thing that told him first. She took him to the conservatory, where the important conversations happened, among the warm dark and the drowsing plants. Gomez came with them, which was itself a signal, because Gomez did not attend the quiet conversations unless they were the kind a father needed to be present for. They sat Harry down on the old iron bench by Cleopatra, and Morticia drew up a stool in front of him and took both his hands in both of hers, and she looked at him with her serene pale face, and she did not soften it, because softening the truth was a way of lying, and she did not lie to her children. You know that we found you, she said. You have always known that. You know that your first parents died and that you came to the Dursleys and that we took you out of that. What you do not know is how your first parents died and why, and what it has to do with the mark on your forehead and the letter in your pocket. You are 11 today, you are old enough, and a school full of strangers is about to tell you a version of it, so you will hear the true one first from me in your own house where you are safe. Harry sat very still. Cleopatra, sensing something, lowered a blossom to rest against his shoulder like a hand. Your name, Morticia said, before it was Addams, was Potter, Harry James Potter. Your father was James and your mother was Lily, and they were a wizard and a witch of the ordinary British kind, the wand-end Latin kind, and by every account that has reached me they were brave and they were kind and they loved you past all sense. I want you to hold those two things at once, my darling, because they are both true and they do not comfort each other. They loved you and they died for you. How? Harry said. His voice was steady. He had learned steadiness in this house from this woman and he used it now. There was a man, said Morticia. There is still, I think, in some fashion a man, though he is not much of one anymore. He had made himself into a kind of horror out of a fear of dying, which is the most ordinary way in the world to become a monster and the least forgivable. He was killing his way through your parents' country toward some end of his own, and a prophecy was made that named a child who might undo him, and the prophecy might have meant you or it might have meant another boy entirely, but he chose to believe it meant you. So he came to your house on the night you were 1 year old, and he killed your father in the hallway, and he killed your mother in front of your crib after she begged him to take her instead, and then he turned his wand on you. Her hands tightened on his. And something your mother did in dying, some old deep magic of the kind this family has always known and his kind has always sneered at, the magic of a mother who steps in front of a killing curse without a wand or a word, because there is simply nothing else in her but the will to save you. That magic stood between you and him. And the curse he meant for you broke on it and rebounded on him, and it did not kill him because he had made himself very hard to kill, but it destroyed his body and scattered whatever was left of him to the winds, and it left you alive in the ruins with that mark on your forehead, the only living thing in the house. The conservatory was quiet. Somewhere water dripped. Harry looked at the scar's reflection, faint, in the dark glass of the window, and then he looked back at his mother. They call you the boy who lived, Gomez said gently from beside her, and there was none of the exuberance in him now, only a low, steady tenderness. In their country you are famous, Harry, a statue and storybook famous. Children who have never met you are told about you at bedtime. A whole world has spent 10 years being grateful to a 1-year-old for surviving a night that killed his mother and father, and telling itself a happy story about it, because the happy story is easier to carry than the truth, which is that a good man and a good woman died in a hallway in a nursery so that their son could grow up, and nobody asked the son whether he wanted to be a symbol. Harry sat with all of it. He did not cry, though no one in the room would have thought less of him if he had. The Adamses respected grief the way they respected everything strong and true. He turned it over, the mother who had stepped in front of the curse, the father in the hallway, the man made of fear, and he found, examining himself with the honesty they had taught him, that the largest thing in him was not sorrow, though sorrow was there, folded and quiet and his to keep. The largest thing in him was that he was loved. That he had been loved from the very first breath of his life, so ferociously that it had killed a monster, and then loved again out of the rain so completely that it had made him whole. And a boy who has been loved like that twice does not break when he learns the price of it. He steadies. He had been steadied his whole life for exactly this. Then I'm not the boy who lived, Harry said at last. Not really. My mother's the woman who died so I could. That's a different story. That one I'll carry. He looked up. The rest of it, the famous part, the symbol part, that's theirs. They can keep it. I never agreed to it. Morticia looked at her son for a long moment, and whatever moved behind her still face was too large and too private to show, and she lifted his hands and pressed them to her cool cheek and held them there. You are, she said softly, the most Addams thing that has ever happened to this family, and not one drop of our blood is in you, and that is the proof, if I ever needed one, that blood was never the point. She released his hands. There is a witch coming to see you, tomorrow or the day after, from the school. She helped write that letter, and she will want to look at you and measure you and decide what you are. I want you to let her. I want you to be exactly, precisely yourself, and I want you to watch her more carefully than she watches you, and I want you to notice everything and tell me all of it after. Can you do that for me? I've been raised by you and Wednesday, Harry said. Watching people is the family trade. He did not go to bed after the conservatory. He climbed the ivy to the roof, where you went when you needed the whole sky, and Wednesday was already there, because Wednesday was always already there, sitting at the edge above the 60-foot drop with a book she was not reading. She did not ask if he was all right. Wednesday held "Are you all right" to be the laziest question in any language. A door opened only so it could be closed again. She waited. My mother stepped in front of a curse for me, Harry said finally to the Moor. My first mother, Lily. She had no wand, she said nothing clever. She simply put herself between me and the end of the world, and it worked, because there was nothing else left in her but that. He watched a cloud take the moon and give it back. I've been trying to feel sad about it. I keep reaching for the sad and finding something else in the drawer. What do you find? Wednesday asked. Lucky, Harry said, and the word came out strange and entirely true. 2 women have decided I was worth dying for. One did it before I could talk. The other does it every day and hasn't been asked to yet, but I saw her face when the county man said removal, and I know that she would. He drew his knees up. That isn't a sad life, Wednesday. It's the least sad life I can picture. I kept waiting to break about it, the way people are meant to. I don't. I was starting to think something was wrong with me. Then I remembered whose kitchen I was raised in. Wednesday was quiet a while. Below them the ravens shifted and grumbled among the stones. When Marie Antoinette lost her head, she said, I didn't weep because she was dead. I wept because I had done it and I could not undo it. Then you undid it, first night. You gave her back her face because you wanted me to have a better gift than I had given you. She turned the closed book over in her hands. I have thought about that for 7 years. I have concluded it means you were built to hand back more than the world takes off you. Most people spend their whole lives trying to break even. You run a surplus. It is the strangest thing about you, and I have catalogued all of them. She looked at him sidelong. Your mother ran a surplus too at the end. That is where you get it, not the eyes, that. Harry looked at her, the fierce, quiet girl who never said the soft thing and had just said the softest thing he had ever heard, and he understood that she had handed him his mother back in the only currency she trusted, which was analysis, cold and exact and laid across 2 open palms like a blade offered hilt first. Thank you, he said. Don't, said Wednesday. It was merely true. Now come down before you fall. If you fall I shall have to be sad, and I have a full schedule. The witch came the day after in the middle of the afternoon, and she came, to the family's mild disappointment, entirely without ceremony. No flash of fire, no clap of thunder, no coach drawn by things that should not draw coaches. She simply was not on the drive, and then she was, a tall, severe woman in emerald robes and a pointed hat, standing between the welcome gate and the rest in PICES stone with her mouth already pressed thin. Professor Minerva McGonagall had transfigured herself back from a tabby cat on the gravel, straightened her spectacles, taken one comprehensive look at Blackpool Grange, and revised in the space of a breath every assumption she had carried up the moor road. Albus had told her almost nothing, which was itself unusual and therefore alarming. A house call, he had said, a boy who had slipped through the cracks. See that he has his letter and understands it, assess the household, report to me and to no one else. She had assumed, on the strength of a decade of doing exactly this, that she would find what she always found when a Muggle-raised child had gone unaccounted for. A frightened child in a bewildered house, a family who thought their son was mad or ill, a great deal of gentle explaining to do. She had brought her kindest voice. She had worn it up the drive. She let it fall off her face as she looked at the house. The house looked back, that was the sensation, standing on the gravel, that Blackpool Grange was a thing with opinions, and that it had heard she was coming, and that it was reserving judgment in the manner of an old dowager receiving a tradesman at the front door by mistake. A raven the size of a terrier watched her from the leaning oak. The cemetery on the lawn was extensive and well tended, and she noted with a professional eye she had not known she possessed until that moment, a great deal more recent in places than she would have liked. The gate said welcome. She did not, on the whole, feel welcome. She felt observed. The front door opened before she reached it, and a butler of frankly impossible dimensions inclined himself in a bow and made a sound like a crypt settling, and Minerva McGonagall, who had faced down Death Eaters and jeweled dark wizards and once told Albus Dumbledore to his face that a plan of his was idiotic, discovered that her mouth had gone dry. "You'll be the witch from the school," said a voice, and she looked down, and there was a girl. She was perhaps 12, in a black dress with a white collar, with 2 black braids and a face that gave away precisely nothing and eyes that gave away that the giving away of nothing was a deliberate policy rigorously enforced. She was holding a large knife, which she was using with evident competence to sharpen a stick to a point, and she did not stop doing this as she regarded her visitor. "I'm Wednesday," she said. "Harry's my brother, not by blood. By choice, which is stronger, because blood is an accident and choice is a verdict." She resumed her whittling. "You're here to take him away to Scotland. I've decided how I feel about that. Would you like to know?" "I am here," said Professor McGonagall, recovering herself because she had taught 11-year-olds for 40 years and she was not about to be rooted by one on a doorstep, to deliver a letter and to speak with Mr. Potter and his guardians, and with you, evidently. "What is your surname, child?" "Addams," said Wednesday. "And his surname is Addams too. Now, whatever your book says, you should adjust your book. Books that are wrong about people cause a great deal of trouble." She tested the point of the stick against her thumb, found it satisfactory, and finally looked up, and the full flat weight of her attention landed on the professor like a dropped stone. "I've decided I approve of Scotland provisionally. Harry wants to see the world that made him an orphan, and I want him to see it, because you can't out-argue a place you've never been to, and Harry's going to have a great deal to argue about. But I want you to understand something before you take one step further up this path." She stood. She was not tall. She managed, nonetheless, to deliver the next sentence downward. "He is not lost. He is not neglected. He is not a poor motherless thing your school is going to rescue. He is the most loved person I have ever met, and I have taken his measure very carefully, and if any harm comes to him in that castle that could have been prevented by an adult paying attention, I will come to Scotland myself, and I will be extremely patient about it, and you will not enjoy the outcome. Do we understand each other, Professor?" There was a silence on the doorstep. "Yes," said Minerva McGonagall slowly, and was surprised to find that she meant it. "I believe we do." "Good." Wednesday stepped aside and opened the great door wide, and beyond it the candle-lit cavern of the entrance hall breathed out warm air that smelled of beeswax and old stone. "Then come in. Mother's made tea. Don't drink anything Grandmama offers you, and if the hand brings you a biscuit, take it. It's rude not to, and Thing has been sulking since he wasn't allowed to shoot your owl." Professor McGonagall took tea in a drawing-room the size of a chapel, with a family unlike any she had encountered in a long career of encountering unlikely families, and she found, over the course of the following hour, every certainty she had brought up the moor road quietly and comprehensively dismantled. She had come braced to reassure. There was no one to reassure. The mother, Morticia, poured tea with the grace of a duchess and the stillness of a held breath, and turned out to know things about the deep old magic that Minerva had believed lived only in restricted books, and to know them not as history but as housekeeping. The father, Gomez, was delighted by everything Minerva said, quoted Hogwarts, a history at her from memory, corrected her once, gently and correctly, on a point of its founding, and wept openly and happily when she described the great hall. The grandmother offered her something in a chipped cup that Wednesday intercepted with a look. A disembodied hand refilled the biscuits, and in the middle of all of it sat Harry himself. She had expected James. Everyone always expected James. The resemblance was a matter of public record. And he had James's untidy black hair and James's build, and Lily's green eyes set in his face like 2 lit lamps, and it should have wrung her heart, and it did, but not as she had prepared for. Because James Potter at 11 had been a bright, loud, arrogant delight of a boy, all edges and appetite, and this child was something she had no ready category for. He sat with his ankles crossed and his teacup balanced, and he watched her as she imagined she must look watching her students, with a calm total attention that missed nothing. And when she spoke to him, he answered directly and warmly, and without a shred of the fear or the hunger or the desperate eagerness to please that she had spent a decade learning to expect from the ones who had been raised hard. He was not raised hard. That was the thing she could not fit into her report. Somewhere between the cupboard the old Dursley memory had shown Albus in this drawing-room. Someone had raised Harry Potter soft, in the good sense, soft the way a landing is soft, and the frightened cracked thing that should have been sitting across from her was simply, bafflingly not there. In its place was a poised and unbothered and slightly amused 11-year-old who asked her better questions about her school than most parents did. "Will I be behind?" was one of them. The others will have grown up with it. Magic spells the history. I've grown up with a different kind. Grandmama says it's older and the school will pretend it doesn't count. I'd like to know what I'm walking into. You will be behind in some things, Minerva said, because she did not flatter children, and ahead in others you don't yet know the value of. You will need to work. But I have taught the children of great magical houses who could not tie their own shoes without a house elf, and I have taught the Muggle-born who arrived not knowing our world existed and left at the top of their year. What matters is not what you walk in with, Mr. Potter. It is what you refuse to walk out without. Adams, said three Adamses at once, without heat, the correction as automatic as breathing. Mr. Adams, said Professor McGonagall, and inclined her head in something in her chest that had been clenched since the gravel loosened a notch, because a family that would correct a professor in unison over a surname was a family, whatever else it was, and this boy was not going into the world alone. They talked a long while. She explained the houses, the terms, the wand, Diagon Alley. She watched Harry take it in, sort it, ask about it, and she watched Wednesday watch her back the entire time with the unblinking patience of a hawk on a fence post, and she understood that she was being assessed at least as thoroughly as she was assessing, and that the assessment being conducted from the black-braided end of the sofa was, if anything, the more rigorous of the two. When she rose to leave, Morticia rose with her and walked her to the door, and at the threshold, in the last of the light, the two women stood a moment, the emerald-robed professor and the black-gowned mother, and took each other's true measure at last. You have questions you are not asking me, Morticia said, about who wrote his letter and why it waited 11 years and why the man who sent you here told you almost nothing. You are an honest woman in a position that is not, I think, being honest with you. I will not ask you to betray your headmaster. I will only ask you to remember when you make your report that you sat in my house and drank my tea and looked into my son's eyes, and that you know, whatever you are told afterward, what you saw. Minerva McGonagall looked at her for a long moment. I saw a happy child, she said quietly, in a house full of graves. It is the last thing I expected, and I have been doing this a very long time. She settled her hat. I will make an honest report, Mrs. Addams. I make no other kind. What is done with it after it leaves my hands has never been mine to control, and I have made my peace with that, or I tell myself I have, which, as your husband would say, is a different thing. She stepped out onto the gravel and became, between one breath and the next, a tabby cat which sat and regarded the house once more with its yellow eyes, and then turned and trotted away down the moor road into the dusk. They held the family council that night, though it was less a council than a formality, because the decision had made itself somewhere in the last 2 days and everyone had felt it happen. I want to go, Harry said. They were all in the drawing room, the fire high, Lurch at the organ playing something that agreed with the weather. Not because they want me, because I want to see it. The whole world that made me, the one that turned my mother into a bedtime story and left me on a doorstep and forgot to check I was still there. I want to walk into the middle of it and look at it with my own eyes. And there's an old man behind it somewhere, the one who sent the cat, the one who's been looking for me in the village for years without ever finding the house. I want to meet him. I want to know why school had my name in a book on the day I was born and who decided what happened to me after and whether he's sorry. He looked around at his family. I can't do that from a roof on the moor. I have to go where they are. Then you'll go, said Gomez, and you'll go magnificently. He'll want protecting, said Grandmama, who had been listening from her chair with her eyes shut and her hands folded on her stick and now opened one eye. Not the wand kind, the old kind. I'll not have my sprout walking into a nest of committee wizards with nothing of ours sewn into his coat. She was already rummaging in her shawl, which contained, as far as anyone had ever established, an entire apothecary and possibly a weather system of its own. A pinch of graveyard salt, a knot of my hair, a tooth off something that loved him. It won't stop a curse. It'll do worse than stop one. It'll tell us the instant a curse is aimed at him, and it'll tell them, whoever they are, exactly whose child they've raised a hand against. She cackled and shut the eye again. Let the old man in Scotland copy that into his book. And you'll write, said Morticia, every week, and you'll tell us everything, and the very moment that Castle stops being a place you're choosing to be and becomes a place you're being kept, you'll tell us that too, and we will come, and we will not knock. She said it serenely, pouring wine, and no one in the room mistook the serenity for softness. The world tried to make you small once, my darling. It failed because it dropped you in the rain and we found you. It is about to try again more cleverly with a castle and a legend and a kind old man with sad eyes. It will fail again. But this time you'll be the one to make it fail, and we'll only be standing behind you, and I think that is right. I think it's time. Wednesday had said nothing through all of it. She sat apart, as always, on the bottom step of the great stair, and when the talk wound down, she spoke into the space it left flatly to the fire. I'm coming to the shop, she said. Wherever they buy the wands. I've read there's an alley in London where it all is, hidden behind a pub. I'm coming. Harry doesn't buy a wand without me there to disapprove of it. That's not negotiable, and I want to see the old man too if he shows himself. I want to stand next to Harry when he does. She looked up, and across the firelit room she found Harry's eyes and held them. You can go to Scotland. I've made my peace with Scotland. But you're not walking into that world for the first time alone, and you're not walking into it as the poor lost boy they've been waiting for. You're walking in as an Addams with an Addams beside you, and they can put that in their book. Harry crossed the room and sat down beside her on the step, close, their shoulders not quite touching, the way they had sat since the first night. I was counting on it, he said. Outside, on the dark moor, a single owl beat its way north through the wind, carrying a short letter in an untidy 11-year-old hand, addressed to a deputy headmistress, accepting a place. And far ahead of it, in a high round office, an old man waited for word, and did not know yet that the word, when it came, would not be the word he wanted, and that a girl with black braids had already promised, on a doorstep, to come to Scotland if he made her, and that Minerva McGonagall's honest report would contain the single most inconvenient sentence he had read in 7 years. The boy is not broken, Albus. He is not anything you planned for. He is loved, and he knows it, and he is coming. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Diagon Alley and the Man with the Twinkle. They came to London the Addams way, which is to say by hearse. Lurch drove. The great black car came down out of the moor and along the motorway at a stately funereal pace, unhurried, magnificent, causing a low-grade panic in 3 counties, and it drew up at last outside a shabby little pub on Charing Cross Road that the Muggle's eyes slid off without stopping, and out of it stepped the entire family, one after another, like clowns from a car if the clowns had been recruited from a Victorian séance. Morticia in black veiled against the daylight which she regarded as a personal weakness of the sky. Gomez in his pinstripes, cigar aloft, twirling with anticipation. Grandmamma with her carpet bag of illegal remedies. Fester, who had been promised he could look at the goblins. Pugsley, sworn to touch nothing. Thing, riding in the breast pocket of Gomez's coat with 2 fingers hooked over the edge like a tourist at a rail. Wednesday, who did not so much walk as advance. And Harry in the middle of them, 11 years old and entirely calm, in a black coat Grandmamma had sewn a tooth into overnight. The pub was called the Leaky Cauldron, and it was full, and it went silent the moment they came through the door. This was not unusual. Rooms went silent when the Addamses entered rooms. It was one of the family's reliable and dependable pleasures. What was unusual was the specific quality of this silence, which started as the ordinary hush of a dim room noticing that something extraordinary had walked in, and then curdled, table by table, into something sharper as the eyes traveled up from the terrifying family to the child at its center and found his forehead. Merlin's beard, somebody whispered. That's Harry Potter. The name went across the room like a match dropped in dry grass. Harry Potter, Harry Potter. Chairs scraped. A man stood up so fast he knocked his stool over. A woman pressed both hands to her mouth. The old barman had gone very still with a glass half-polished in his grip, and 100 faces turned, hungry and reverent and astonished, toward the black-haired boy they had told each other bedtime stories about for a decade, the one who had vanished, the one nobody could find, the boy who lived, standing in their pub at last in a coat that smelled faintly of graveyards, flanked by the most frightening people any of them had ever seen. Harry looked at all of it, the standing man, the reverent faces, the reaching hands. He had known this was coming. His mother had told him it would. He had thought he understood it. He found, standing in it, that understanding a thing and being looked at by 100 strangers who believe they own a piece of you are 2 different educations. They're staring at you, Wednesday murmured, close to his ear, flat and interested. All of them. They think they know you. They've decided things about you. Look at that one, he's crying. He's never met you and he's crying. She surveyed the room the way a general surveys terrain. This is what Mother meant. This is the world that turned your dead mother into a bedtime story. It wants to touch you to prove the story's real. I know, Harry said quietly. You could make them stop, Wednesday said. I could make them stop. I've got a stick sharpened to a scientific point and a great deal of unspent Tuesday. No, said Harry. Watch. Mother's going to do it, and she's not going to touch anyone. Morticia had come to stand beside her son, and she lifted her veil, unhurried, and she looked out over the silent, hungry room of people who wanted her boy, and she smiled at them, and it was a smile of exquisite and total warmth, and it was the single most frightening thing that had happened in the Leaky Cauldron since the incident with the ceiling in 1962. How kind of you all, she said, and her low voice reached every corner without seeming to try, to welcome my son home. He's been so looked forward to. She let the words settle. You'll forgive us if we don't linger. We've a great deal of shopping to do, and my son startles, and I do so hate to see what happens to things that startle him. She did not specify. Specifying was for people who lacked confidence. Do enjoy your afternoon. The reaching hands withdrew. The standing man sat down. The crowd of the Leaky Cauldron discovered, as one, an urgent interest in its own drinks, and the family passed through it untouched out the back, into the little walled yard where a shabby brick wall waited, and Gomez, who had read the relevant chapter of Hogwarts, a history 4 times in giddy preparation, tapped the correct bricks in the correct order with the tip of his cane, and the wall folded itself open like a flower made of masonry, and there beyond it lay Diagon Alley. Oh, breathed Fester, gazing down the crooked cobbled street with its leaning shop fronts and its cauldron stacks and its owls and its apothecary reek and its distant white marble bank. Oh, it's hideous, it's perfect, can I keep some of it? No, said everyone. Gringotts stood at the end of the alley, snow-white and slightly crooked, a bank built by things that took money and death with equal and admirable seriousness. Two goblins in scarlet and gold flanked the burnished doors, and they watched the approaching family with the flat professional appraisal of their kind, the appraisal that weighed you, priced you, and found you wanting, and one of them looked at the Addamses and did something goblins did perhaps twice a century. He bowed, said Pugsley, awed. The scary money creature bowed. Why did it bow? It didn't bow at anyone else. Because, said Gomez, glowing, sweeping off his hat and returning the bow with a flourish that came from somewhere deep in the 15th century, the Addams family has banked with Gringotts since before there was a Gringotts, when it was a hole in a hill and a promise. We do not keep our fortune here, we are far too paranoid, but we keep our word here, and we have kept it for 800 years, and a goblin remembers a kept word longer than a river remembers its bed. Master Goblin, well met. How is the Voltaire this century? Still biting, Master Addams, said the goblin, and there was the ghost of respect in it, and possibly deep down where goblins kept such things, the ghost of affection. You honor the hall, and you bring young blood. My son, said Gomez. Harry, he'll be wanting into the Potter vault today if the Potter vault will have him. The goblin's black eyes moved to Harry and traveled the familiar route up to the scar, and then, unlike every human eye that had done the same all afternoon, they came back down and looked at Harry himself, the actual boy with actual interest. Potter by blood, the goblin observed. Addams by raising, two old debts standing in one coat. He inclined his head a precise degree. Gringotts finds that interesting. Gringotts is rarely interested. Come, young Potter Addams. Bring your key if the wizard who holds your key remembered to give it to you. Something cold and knowing moved in the goblin's face. They so often forget. Inside, in the vast echoing marble hall where 100 goblins scratched at ledgers under 100 hanging lamps, a difficulty arose, and the difficulty was that Harry did not have a key. The Potter Trust key, said the senior goblin at the counter, a wizened creature named Griffook who consulted a great ledger and frowned at what he found there, was assigned, upon the deaths of James and Lily Potter, to the custody of the child's magical guardian, pending the child's majority. The magical guardian of record is one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, chief warlock of the Wisengamot. Griffook looked up over his spectacles at the family. Guardian has drawn upon this vault on the ward's behalf on several occasions across the past 10 years, modestly, correctly, for the ward's care. For his care, Morticia repeated. Her voice had not changed. The temperature of the marble hall did, fractionally, in the way the temperature of a hall does when a woman like Morticia is displeased and has decided for now to be polite about it. How thoughtful of the chief warlock to draw upon my son's inheritance for the care of a boy he could not find. I should like to see the itemization, every nut. And I should like to know, Master Griffook, since your ledgers are the only honest thing this world seems to keep, whether the guardian ever once in 10 years spent a single coin of my son's money finding out whether my son was alive. Griffook considered her. Goblins did not, as a rule, take sides in the affairs of wizards, and they did not, as a rule, warm to human sentiment. But goblins kept ledgers, and a ledger is a moral document if you read it right, and Griffook had read this one, and he had noticed, as Morticia had guessed he would, the shape of the hole in it. He did not, said Griffook. The ward's whereabouts do not appear as a line item. There are charges here for the ward's upkeep at an address the ward did not, our records now suggest, reside at for the past 7 years. He closed the ledger with a soft and final sound. Gringotts does not editorialize. Gringotts observes that money was spent caring for a boy who was not where the spender claimed him to be, and Gringotts finds in its long experience that such arrangements are seldom the fault of the boy. He reached beneath the counter and produced, on a black cushion, a little gold key, and a second, heavier key of old dark iron. The trust key which the guardian will discover has been reissued to the ward directly, as is the ward's right at the invocation of a blood guardian of standing, which you, madam, by the old law your family has never stopped keeping, most certainly are, and this. He set the iron key beside the gold one, the key to the true Potter vault, the deep one, the one the guardian was never given, because guardianship ends at majority and the deep vault waits for blood. It is not for today. But it is yours, Harry Potter, and no wizard has ever held it, and I thought you should know it exists, and that no one has been able to spend from it, and that it has been waiting for you exactly as long as you have been alive. Harry took the 2 keys. He weighed them in his palm, the light one and the heavy one, the trust and the deep, and he looked up at the goblin, and he did the thing that made Griffook decide, privately, that this particular wizard child was worth remembering. He did not thank Griffook for the money. Thank you, Harry said, for reading the ledger honestly. That's the rarest thing anyone's done for me all day, and I've been given a standing ovation for surviving as a baby. He pocketed the keys. When I'm older, I'd like to bank with Gringotts properly, not because I trust banks, because I trust a thing that keeps its word for 800 years more than I trust a man who spent my money looking after a boy who wasn't there. Griffith looked at the Potter boy who had been raised by the Addams family, and he smiled, which is a thing you should hope never to see a goblin do unless it is smiling at you, in which case you have done something very right. The account, he said, will be waiting. Getting to the vault meant the carts, and the carts meant Gringotts' single concession to joy, which was that it had built its treasure tunnels as the largest and most lethal fairground ride in Europe, and then pretended, with a straight goblin face, that this was purely a matter of logistics. Griffith took them down himself. The cart was a rattling iron thing that plunged from the marble hall into a throat of raw rock and fell, shrieking through a mile of torchlit dark, past underground lakes and stalactites in a distant roar that Griffith identified without turning around as the dragon. We do not discuss the dragon, and the wind tore at their coats and the track banked and dropped and looped, and the entire Addams family to a person had the time of their lives. Again, Fester bellowed into the rushing dark. Can we go again? This is the finest bank I have ever entered, Gomez shouted, his cigar somehow still lit, one arm braced around a delighted Pugsley and the other flung wide to embrace the abyss. Tish, tish, they keep their gold at the bottom of a nightmare. I want to move all our money here at once. We're too paranoid, darling, Morticia called back serenely, entirely unruffled, her veil streaming behind her like a battle standard. Wednesday did not shout. She sat very straight in the plunging cart with her hands folded and her eyes half closed, and when the track took its steepest drop and the whole family's stomach was left somewhere above them in the dark, the corner of her mouth moved a single degree, which was, for Wednesday, the equivalent of leaping up and screaming with delight, and Harry saw it and said nothing, and grinned into the wind for the both of them. The Potter Trust vault, when they reached it, was a plain stone room behind an iron door, and inside it, stacked in neat, unglamorous piles, sat more gold than Harry had ever pictured belonging to one person, mounds of it, gold and silver and bronze, glowing dully in the torchlight. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at it and felt, unexpectedly, almost nothing, and understood why. It's only money, he said. I thought it would feel like something. My parents left it to me, and it's the one thing of theirs I can hold in my hands, and it turns out it's the least of what they left me. He took what he needed for the school year, a careful handful, no more, counted into a leather pouch, and left the rest exactly as it lay. The real inheritance was the curse she broke and the eyes she gave me. This is just what pays for the cauldron. Griffith, watching from the cart, made a small notation in a mental ledger that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with which wizards were worth the trouble, and moved Harry Potter quietly into the very short column he kept for the ones who understood the difference. They did the rest of the shopping in a loose, fond swarm, and it was for Harry one of the strangest and best afternoons of his life, because he did it as a boy with a family, and every shop they entered received the family the way shops had received them all his life, with an initial spasm of terror that mellowed, under the sheer unbudgeable good humor of the Addamses, into a kind of dazed cooperation. At Madame Malkin's he was measured for robes, while Wednesday stood in the corner and critiqued the entire premise of school uniforms as an instrument of psychological flattening, and a pale, pointed boy being fitted on the next stool informed Harry that he supposed he'd be in Slytherin like all the best people, and that his father said the Potters were blood traitors, and Wednesday turned her head and looked at the pale boy for a period of time that made him abruptly need to consult his mother, and said only, "Your left eyebrow is a millimeter higher than your right. It means you're lying or afraid or both. I've read about it. I read about everything. I know where you'll be sleeping," and the pale boy left without his second robe. At Flourish and Blots, Gomez bought Harry every book on the list and then, unable to help himself, 40 that were not, staggering to the counter under a load of literature that included hexes for the discerning host, a practical guide to faking your own death, and a slim volume titled So You've Angered a Vengeful Spirit, which he pressed on Harry as essential, absolutely essential, you never know. Grandmama vanished into the apothecary next door and emerged 20 minutes later on excellent terms with the proprietor, having taught him 3 things about powdered graveyard bone that he had not known and would be too frightened to use. Fester bought a telescope and immediately took it apart to see if it was watching him back. Pugsley, sworn to touch nothing, touched exactly one thing, which exploded gently and was widely agreed to have deserved it. Midway through the afternoon, Gomez declared that no expedition was complete without an interval, and installed the entire family at a wrought iron table outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor, where the proprietor, a nervous man in a striped apron, took their order and then had to be talked gently down after Grandmama asked, with real culinary interest, whether he did anything in a hemlock sorbet. "He does not, Mother," said Morticia. "We are guests." Harry had a chocolate and raspberry that Florian, recovering, refused to charge him for, on the grounds that the boy who lived eating ice cream at his tables was worth more than the ice cream, a piece of reasoning Harry found both kind and faintly unsettling, and added to the growing pile of evidence that fame was a currency other people spent on his behalf without asking his permission. He ate it and watched the alley because his family had taught him to watch, and the alley rewarded it. The owls wheeling over the rooftops, the witches haggling over dragonhide gloves, children pressed flat to shop windows, and twice, at the edge of things, the plum-robed old man who was not looking at him. "You've marked him," Morticia observed, without turning her head, delicately spooning something black. "The silver one. He circled us 3 times. He shops like a man who is not shopping." "I marked him at Gringotts," said Wednesday. "I marked him in the village 2 years back," said Grandmama, buying a lemon sherbet and lying to a postmistress. "I never forget a liar's back, same back, older coat." She crunched her cone with relish. "He'll come to the wand shop. His sort always waits for the wand. They think a boy holding his first wand is a boy at his softest." She cackled. "They have clearly never met a boy who was handed his first knife at 4 and thanked the one who gave it to him." The last stop before the wands, at Wednesday's insistence, was the magical menagerie, because the letter permitted a familiar, and Wednesday intended to see that Harry left with the correct one. Shop was a riot of cages and tanks and eyes in the dark, cats and toads and owls and rats and things the front of the shop declined to display, and it stank wonderfully, and Pugsley had to be physically restrained from buying a tank of poisonous slugs for research. "Not a cat," said Grandmama flatly from the door, arms folded. "Cats are informers. Never trust a thing that lands on its feet. It's a moral failing." "The letter says no raven," Harry noted, reading it again, "which is a shame." "I'd have liked a raven." "The letter says no raven," said Wednesday. "It says nothing about what a raven's clever cousins are permitted to be written down as on a form." She had stopped before a tall cage at the back of the shop in the deepest shadow, where something large and white and silent regarded the family with round, unimpressed eyes. It was a snowy owl, female, enormous, and she had plainly been in the shop a long while, and she looked out at the reaching hands of the world with exactly the flat contempt Wednesday reserved for it, and the two of them, girl and owl, recognized each other at a glance. "Her," said Wednesday, "that one. Everyone's walked past her for a year because she won't perform. She won't hoot on command, and she won't be sweet, and she bites the ones who tap the glass." She turned to Harry. "She has been waiting in a cage, in a shop full of people who wanted a friendlier bird, for someone who would want her exactly as she is. I refuse to let that go unanswered. It is the whole story of this family in a cage. By the owl, Harry." Harry looked at the owl, and the owl looked at Harry, and after a moment she spread her great white wings and mantled them, and then folded them again and turned her back on the entire shop except for him, which was, from an owl of that temperament, a proposal of marriage. "Her name's Hedwig," Harry said. He did not know where the name came from. It arrived whole, the way the important things did around Harry, out of somewhere older than himself. "Wrap her." "Well, don't wrap her, she'd take your fingers." "But she's coming with us." Hedwig would, in the months ahead, bite 3 prefects, refuse to deliver any letter she disapproved of the tone of, and sleep each night on the footboard of Harry's bed with one eye open on the door, and she would be, of everything Harry carried into the wizarding world, the one thing most instantly recognized by everyone who met her as belonging to the family that had raised him. And through all of it Harry noticed, as his family had trained him to notice, that they were being followed. Not by the crowd, though the crowd trailed them at a fascinated distance the whole afternoon, by one man. An old man, tall and thin, in robes of a plum color that no one else in the alley would have dared, with half-moon spectacles and a silver beard tucked into his belt, who appeared at the mouth of one street as they left it, and browsed a stall of self-stirring cauldrons at the exact moment they passed, and stood outside the apothecary reading a notice about dragon liver prices for rather longer than dragon liver prices merited. He never approached. He never quite met Harry's eye. He simply was there again and again, a courteous silver shadow arranging with enormous and patient care to be somewhere Harry would eventually have to be. "That's him," Harry said to Wednesday low outside the cauldron shop, "the old man from the village, the one who's been looking for me." "I know," said Wednesday, who had clocked Dumbledore before they left Gringotts. "He's very good. He hasn't looked at you directly once. He's letting you find him so that when you meet it feels like your idea. That's not an accident, that's craft. I dislike him already, and I dislike almost everyone, so that's not saying much, but I want you to know I got there quickly." She adjusted the strap of Harry's book bag with an absent, proprietary tug. "He'll make his move at the wand shop. It's the last thing on the list. He'll want to meet you when your hands are full and your family's distracted and you feel like a child buying a stick. Don't let him pick the ground, Harry. You pick the ground." "Be finished shopping," said Wednesday, "before he thinks you are." Ollivander's shop was narrow and dim and stacked to its shadowed ceiling with 10,000 slim boxes, and it smelled of dust and old wood and the particular electric quiet of a place where a great deal of power is kept lying down. The family filled it the way water fills a boot. And out of the shadows at the back, silent, pale-eyed, came Mr. Ollivander, who had sold a wand to every witch and wizard in Britain for 100 years and had been waiting, he said, for this particular customer with special interest. "Harry Potter," he breathed, and his moon-pale eyes went inevitably to the scar. I wondered when I would see you. You have your mother's eyes. It seems only yesterday she was in here herself, buying her first wand, 10¼ inches, swishy willow. A lovely wand for charm work, and your father favored a mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration. His eyes drifted to the scar again and lingered, and something troubled moved behind them. I'm sorry to say I sold the wand that did that to you, 13½ inches. You, a powerful wand, very powerful in the wrong hands. If I had known what that wand would go out into the world to do. He did not finish. Wands, his face said, were not responsible for their wizards, but the men who matched them sometimes lay awake. You remember every wand you've ever sold, Wednesday said. It was not a question. She had drifted to the counter and was examining Ollivander with frank professional respect, one keeper of terrible inventories to another. Every one, for 100 years. Every one, young lady. That must be an enormous burden, said Wednesday, knowing precisely which stick you handed to every murderer in the country. She said it admiringly. I should like your job when you die. I'll be very good at it. I already keep lists of who deserves what. I don't doubt it, said Ollivander faintly, and turned with some relief to the measuring. The measuring was a long business and a strange one, and the wands did not want Harry, or Harry did not want them. Box after box, a flick and a wince and a whisked-away failure, a shattered vase, a rain of soot, a small fire in the umbrella stand that Fester applauded. Ollivander grew as the pile of rejected boxes climbed, not frustrated but delighted, more and more delighted, in the manner of a man watching a difficult and wonderful thing take its time. Tricky, tricky, he murmured, and climbed his ladder and came down at last with a box he handled differently from the others, more carefully, the way you handle a subject you have strong feelings about. I wonder, yes, why not, curious, very curious. He opened it. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. Go on, Mr. Potter, give it a wave. Harry took the wand, and the moment his fingers closed on it he felt the warm green place behind his breastbone lean toward it. Recognize it, reach, and a stream of red and gold sparks poured from the tip and lit the dim shop like a struck match, and the family, who had watched him do far stranger things at breakfast, applauded anyway because a family applauds. But Ollivander was not applauding. Ollivander had gone very still. Curious, he said again, softly. Curious, curious. I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, as your sister observed, and it so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave one other feather, only one other. It is very odd that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, its only brother, gave you that scar. The shop was quiet. Harry looked at the wand in his hand, Holly and Phoenix, the twin of the ewe that had killed his mother, and he did the thing that Ollivander, in 100 years of frightening customers with exactly this speech, had never once had a customer do. He laughed, not cruelly, warmly and with real appreciation, the laugh of a boy who has grown up in a house that finds the macabre cozy and had just been handed a genuinely excellent piece of it. So it chose me because it's the brother of the wand that made me an orphan, he said. That's the most Addams thing that's happened all week, and this morning a man cried at me in a pub. He turned the wand in the light, and it warmed to him, and he to it. I'll take it. Obviously I'll take it. Do you know what my grandmother says? She says the best tool is the one with a grudge already in it. This one and I have unfinished business with the same person. That's not a curse, Mr. Ollivander. That's a partnership. He looked up, green eyes bright. Wrap it, and thank you for telling me the truth about it. Everyone keeps trying to give me happy stories today. You gave me a true one. I'll remember which shop did that. And it was at that exact moment, of course, with the wand chosen and the shopping done and Harry entirely, unhurriedly, unshakably at ease, that the bell over the door chimed, and a courteous old voice said, "What a very interesting thing to say," and Albus Dumbledore came in out of the alley at last, on his own 2 feet, at the time of Harry's choosing rather than his own, and found that the ground had already been picked, and that it was not his. "Professor Dumbledore," said Ollivander, startled. "I did not know. No, don't mind me, Garrick, I was passing." The old man's eyes, blue and bright behind the half-moon spectacles, went at last directly to Harry, and there was such warmth in them, such grandfatherly, gentle, sorrowful warmth, that Harry understood at once why the whole world did what this man asked. "Harry, forgive an old man his forwardness. I have wanted to meet you for a very, very long time." "I know," Harry said. "You've been looking for me since I was 4. You just weren't looking in the right rein." The warmth in Dumbledore's face did not falter, but something behind it recalculated, the way a chess player recalculates when a pawn he has ignored for 20 moves is suddenly a queen. He had prepared for this meeting across 7 years. He had prepared for a shy boy, a hungry boy, a boy starved of exactly the warm, wise attention Dumbledore had come here so generously to bestow, a boy who would be grateful, who would attach, who would be so relieved to have a guide at last that he would follow the guide anywhere, even when the terrible time came, into the dark. He had not prepared for this. He looked at the poised child with the twin wands still warm in his hand, and the terrifying family arranged behind him like a wall of patient graves, and Albus Dumbledore, who had not felt it in a long time, felt himself on the back foot. I looked a great deal, he admitted, and there was no lie in it. He had learned long ago that the truth, judiciously offered, was the most disarming instrument in the case. When you left Privet Drive, I confess you gave me a great fright, Harry. I had placed protections around that house, you see. Old magic, blood magic, the kind that would have kept you safe from those who wished you harm. When you vanished from it, those protections could no longer reach you. I feared for you every day for 7 years. You feared for the protections, said Morticia. She had not raised her voice, she never did. But she stepped forward now to stand beside her son, and she lifted her veil so that the chief warlock of the Wisengamot could see her pale, unblinking eyes, and she looked at him as she had looked at Vernon Dursley, and at the man from the county, and at every other person who had ever imagined they might decide something about her child. "Forgive me, Chief Warlock," she went on, in that low, unhurried voice that made men lean in and then wish they hadn't. "I am new to your world and its customs, and I may have the shape of it wrong, so do correct me. You placed my son with his mother's sister. You wove your clever old blood magic around that house, and then, having arranged your protection so beautifully, you did not visit, you did not write, you sent no watcher we ever found, no guardian, no friend. For 4 years my son lived in a cupboard in that protected house, and went hungry in that protected house, and learned in that protected house that he was a burden and a freak, and your magic, your marvelous blood magic, did nothing to stop a single hour of it, because your magic was never meant to keep him happy. It was meant to keep him where you left him." She tilted her head gently, terribly. "It kept him from those who wished him harm, you say. It did not keep him from those who merely did not love him. I have wondered, Chief Warlock, whether you know the difference. I have wondered whether it was ever explained to you, or whether you are simply a man who has confused a safe boy with a boy who is only being saved for later." The shop was very quiet. Ollivander had gone somewhere in the back and become extremely interested in his boxes. Fester, Grandmamma, and Pugsley watched with the bright avid attention of a family who love a good confrontation and have excellent seats. Wednesday watched Dumbledore's hands. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He had faced dark lords and dueled to the death and out-talked the cleverest and cruelest people of his age, and he found that he did not, in this dim wand shop, have a ready answer to a serene woman in black who had just described his life's most careful arrangement as the storage of a child, because there was, in what she said, a splinter of something he had spent 7 years, and arguably 50, refusing to sit down with. "You are not wrong," he said at last quietly, and the admission cost him, and he let it show that it cost him because that too was a kind of craft, and because it also happened to be true, and the two were not always separable in Albus Dumbledore, which was the tragedy of him. "I made choices when you were a baby, Harry, that I believed were for the best. For the greater good is the phrase I have used to myself for many years. I told myself that a boy who grew up humble would grow up strong. I did not visit because to visit was to risk drawing attention to you, and there are those who would still do you great harm. I told myself these things, and a woman wiser than I am has just pointed out in front of a wandmaker and my own conscience that a man can tell himself a great many noble things and still leave a child in a cupboard." He looked at Harry, and the sorrow in his old face was, at least in part, real. "I am sorry. I do not expect it to mean much. I would be suspicious of it myself. But I have wronged you, Harry Potter, in the specific way of a man who was so certain he was protecting the future that he forgot to check on the present. And the present, I see, was being far better cared for than I had any right to hope, by people I underestimated, which I did, and which I will not do again." It was, everyone in the shop understood, a genuine apology and a genuine warning, folded into one another so cleverly that you could not take the first without swallowing the second. And Harry, who had been raised by the 2 or 3 most manipulative, loving people on earth, saw the fold and admired the craftsmanship and was not fooled by it. "Thank you for saying it," Harry said, and meant it, because his mother had taught him that you could accept an apology and still keep both eyes open. "I'll come to your school, I've decided, not because you're sorry and not because I'm the boy in your prophecy, whatever it says. I'm coming because I want to see the whole thing with my own eyes, the world that made me famous for surviving my own mother's murder and the man who arranged where I'd survive it. You've been managing my life since I was 1, Professor, from a distance. I'd like to do the rest of it up close, where I can watch you do it." He smiled, and it was warm and open, and it did not reach the part of him that was measuring the old man to the millimeter, and Dumbledore saw that too, and understood that he was being offered exactly the deal he could not refuse, proximity on Harry's terms. "That," said Dumbledore softly, "is more than fair. That is, I think, wiser than I was at your age, perhaps wiser than I am now." He inclined his silver head to Morticia, a bow of one power to another, the first honest thing he had done since the bell rang. "Madam, you have raised a remarkable young man. I hoped to find a boy who needed me. I find instead a boy who has decided to keep me where he can see me. It is a humbling afternoon." He turned to go and paused at the door and did not turn all the way back. "He will be safe at Hogwarts. I give you my word, for whatever a word from me is now worth to you." "Words are worth what the ledger says they're worth," said Morticia serenely. "Ask the goblins, we'll be watching the account." The bell chimed and Albus Dumbledore went out into Diagon Alley alone, an old man with a great deal to think about, and behind him in the wand shop a family gathered up its parcels and its youngest members and its purchases both permitted and forbidden, and Gomez put his arm around his wife and pressed his lips to her temple, and murmured that she had never been more magnificent, that watching her dismantle a chief warlock was the finest entertainment London had offered in years. And Morticia allowed quietly that the man had at least had the grace to feel it, which was more than the Dursleys ever managed, and which meant, unfortunately, that he was not a monster, only a man, and that men were so much harder to deal with than monsters, because you could not, in good conscience, simply feed them to the plant. Harry walked out into the alley last, the twin wand in his coat and both his mother's worlds now finally fully behind his eyes, and Wednesday fell into step beside him close, their shoulders not quite touching. "You picked the ground," she said. "I picked the ground. He's dangerous," said Wednesday. "The apologizing kind, the kind that's sorry and does it anyway. Those are the worst. You can't hate them cleanly." She looked up the crooked cobbled street, at the leaning shops and the owls and the distant white bank that kept its word for 800 years. "I'm almost glad you're going. I want to see how this ends, and I want to be there when it does." She paused. "Write to me the second something interesting tries to kill you. Before you deal with it, I want to know I didn't miss anything. You'll be the first letter," Harry promised. "I'd better be," said Wednesday, and that from her was the whole of goodbye rehearsed, and neither of them said the rest, because the rest was understood and had been since the rain. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The boy who was not broke in the Addams family saw Harry off from platform 9 3/4, and King's Cross Station would talk about it for years. They came through the barrier one at a time, unhurried, a procession of black through the scarlet and steam bustle of the platform, and the crowd of ordinary wizarding families parted before them, the way water parts before the prow of something old and slow and inevitable. Lurch carried Harry's trunk on one shoulder like a matchbox. Hedwig rode atop it in her cage, surveying the platform with the flat disdain of visiting royalty. Gomez had brought a bottle of something to toast the occasion and a saber, in case the occasion required one. Grandmamma had brought sandwiches nobody would eat and a spell nobody would admit to. And Morticia walked in the center of them with her hand light on Harry's shoulder, veiled, serene, and every parent on that platform looked at her and instinctively drew their own children a step closer, which she noticed and found charming. "Now," said Gomez, crouching to Harry's level beside the scarlet engine, gripping him by both shoulders, his mustache trembling with the effort of a father not making a scene and failing. "You have your wand, you have your books, you have the tooth in your coat and your grandmother's salt and a knife in your left sock, which I packed myself and which we will not mention to the school. You have everything a young man needs to conquer a foreign country." He pulled Harry into a fierce hug that smelled of cigar smoke and cologne and home. "Write to your mother, duel with honor. And if anyone makes you feel small, you remember that you were raised in a house that laughs at death over breakfast, and you laugh back at whatever they've got. Promise me." "I promise, father. That's my boy. That's my magnificent boy." Gomez stood, dabbing at his eye with a black handkerchief, and turned away to be exuberantly emotional in a manner that required both arms. Pugsley shook Harry's hand solemnly and gave him a wrapped package that ticked. "Don't open it near water," he advised, "or fire, or people you like." Fester lifted him clean off the ground in an embrace that cracked something and told him to electrocute somebody memorable. Grandmamma pressed the uneaten sandwiches on him and more quietly took his chin in her hand and looked at him a long moment with the folk-witch surfacing in her ancient eyes, and said only, "The salt goes over the left shoulder, Sprout, always the left, and if the castle feels wrong in a room, it is wrong, and you leave that room and you don't apologize to the architecture." Then she cackled and let him go. Morticia was last. She always was. She understood the grammar of goodbyes better than anyone alive. She lowered her veil and looked at her son, and she did not fuss with his collar or his hair, because to fuss would have been to suggest he needed fixing, and Morticia had never once in 7 years suggested that Harry needed fixing. "You are going into a world that has been waiting for you a long time," she said low only for him. "It will want things from you. It will want you to be a hero or a symbol or a weapon or a lost boy it can save, and it will offer you a great deal in exchange for agreeing to be small enough to hold. You will be tempted some cold evening to take the offer because it is lonely to be the only one in a room who cannot be bought. I know, I have been that one in many rooms." She touched his cheek once, cool and light. "Be lonely then if you must be. Loneliness passes. What you trade away to escape it does not come back. And you are never truly alone, Harry, not for 1 hour, because there is a house on a moor full of people who chose you, and a girl who claimed you out of the rain, and we are all always standing just behind you, whether you can see us or not. Now go, get on the train, and do right. Wednesday has already threatened the postal owls, and they are frightened of her, and it is affecting the service." Harry hugged his mother and held on a moment longer than a boy of 11 likes to admit to, and she let him, because she knew exactly how long the moment needed to be. Then he got on the train. He found a compartment near the back, and he had it to himself for exactly 4 minutes before the door slid open and a round-faced boy looked in near tears and asked in a rush whether Harry had seen a toad because he'd lost his toad. His gran was going to kill him. He'd only had it an hour. "No," said Harry, "but sit down, we'll find it. Toads don't go far, they're pessimists. They assume wherever they are is as good as it gets." He stood unhurried and stepped into the corridor and closed his eyes for a moment and reached out with the warm green sense that had lived behind his breastbone all his life, the one that felt for living things the way a hand feels for warmth, and he found the toad 3 compartments down, sulking under a seat, and he told the round-faced boy where it was, and the round-faced boy stared at him. "How did you do that?" "I like when things are alive," Harry said, which was true and explained nothing, and which the round-faced boy, whose name was Neville, decided not to question, because a person who found your toad was a person worth not questioning. Neville sat down, he stayed. Over the next hour the compartment gradually filled. Neville, and then a bushy-haired girl named Hermione who had been helping Neville search and stayed to interrogate Harry about a book she'd read in which he featured. He informed her the book was wrong, cheerfully, in detail, and she wrote down the corrections with the fervor of a scholar receiving primary sources. And a red-haired boy named Ron who took one look at the scar and went pink and tongue-tied, and then, when Harry treated him exactly like everyone else and asked him about his family and listened to the answers, relaxed into the easy warmth of a boy who had never in his life been listened to first. They were, Harry thought, watching them argue amiably about Quidditch and chocolate frogs and the 4 houses, good people. Not his kind, the way Wednesday was his kind. But good and open and strange enough in their ordinary quiet ways that he liked them, and he understood, sitting among them as the countryside blurred green and gold past the window, that he was going to have friends here, real ones, and that this was going to complicate everything in ways his mother had probably foreseen and declined to spoil for him. "You're not what I expected," Hermione said, studying him over the top of a book she wasn't reading. "The stories all say the boy who lived was raised by muggles who mistreated him. There's a whole chapter, it's very sad. The stories are 3 years out of date and were never accurate to begin with," said Harry. "I was raised by the Addams family, on a moor. It was the least sad childhood in England. Whoever wrote the sad chapter should have checked. People love a sad orphan, it's tidier than the truth." He offered her a sandwich. She declined on the grounds that it appeared to be moving. "That's fair," said Harry. "Grandmamas are like that, they mean well." The compartment door slid open one last time before the end of the journey, and this time it framed the pale, pointed boy from the robe shop, flanked by 2 larger boys built like wardrobes, and he had plainly spent the fitting room defeat rehearsing a rematch. "So it's true," Draco Malfoy drawled in a voice he had practiced in a mirror. "They're saying all down the train that Harry Potter's in this compartment." His gray eyes flicked over Ron's second-hand robes, Neville's anxious round face, Hermione's front teeth, and curled. "You'll soon find that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He held out a pale hand. "I can help you find your feet in the right circles." Harry looked at the offered hand. He knew this moment. He had lived a version of it in a churchyard when he was 4, except that time the hand had belonged to a man who meant it, and Harry had learned at that graveside the exact difference between a hand offered to lift you up and a hand offered to measure you. He did not take Draco's hand. He did not slap it away either, the way a Gryffindor would have, handing Draco the clean enemy he had come for. "I can already tell the wrong sort from the right sort," Harry said pleasantly. "My family taught me." The wrong sort walk into a stranger's compartment, insult everyone in it, and offer to help. The right sort offer to help first and insult no one. He smiled, warm and without a shred of malice, which was infinitely worse than anger. "You're frightened, Draco, of me a little, but mostly of your father, and of what he'll say if you come home having failed to collect the famous Potter for his cabinet. I'm not going to be collected. But I'll tell you what I will do, because my grandmother would want me to leave you an opening, and I never don't." He met the gray eyes steadily. "When you get tired of performing your father, and you will because it's exhausting, I've watched you do it for 10 minutes and I'm tired, there's a seat at my end of things. No worship required, no cruelty allowed, just come and be a person and I'll behave as though you always were one." He turned back to Neville. "Anyway, good luck with the sorting." Draco Malfoy stood there a moment with his hand still out and nothing to do with it, comprehensively unmade. Having come for a duel and been handed instead an act of mercy, he had no idea how to refuse or accept. He withdrew the hand. He muttered something about regretting this. He left. And he would spend the next 7 years orbiting Harry Potter at a baffled distance, unable to hate him and unable to become him, which was, Wednesday would later remark by letter, exactly the correct thing to do to a boy like that, and rather more merciful than poison, and only slightly less permanent. The Hogwarts Express reached Hogsmeade after dark, and the first years crossed the Black Lake in little boats under a sky thick with stars, and the castle rose over them enormous and lit and ancient, 1,000 windows burning gold against the night, and every child in every boat gasped except Harry, who looked up at the great old pile of towers and battlements and felt not awe but recognition, because he had grown up in a house that felt like this. A house with opinions and history and rooms that weren't there anymore, and the castle looked down at the black-haired boy in the second boat and seemed, if a castle can seem anything, to recognize him back. "It's beautiful," breathed Neville beside him. "It's falling down in 3 places and something died in the West Tower this century," said Harry, who could feel these things the way his mother could, and it likes to be walked through slowly. "It's a good house, it's just been lonely. Too many of them come and go and never really look at it." He trailed his fingers in the cold black water. "I'll look at it. Houses remember who looked." The sorting happened in the great hall, under a ceiling that was the night sky, and 4 long tables packed with staring students, and a battered old hat on a stool that sang a song and then fell silent, waiting, and Professor McGonagall unrolled a scroll and began to call the names. And one by one the first years went up and sat on the stool and had the hat placed on their heads, and it shouted a house, and a table cheered, and the line grew shorter, and Harry waited calm in the middle of it, aware of the whispers running along the tables like current. "Potter, that's Potter, is it really? Where's he been? Look at him, he's not what I heard." "Potter, Harry," said Professor McGonagall, and the hall went so quiet you could hear the candles. Harry walked up to the stool. He was aware of 1,000 eyes. He had been raised from the age of 4 by people for whom being stared at by a frightened crowd was a mild and pleasant Tuesday, and so he walked up the way his father would have, unhurried, at ease, and he sat on the stool, and Professor McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head, and it fell over his eyes, and a small voice spoke in his ear. "Well," said the sorting hat, and then it did not say anything for a while. "Well, well, well, now this is different. I have sorted every child in this castle for 1,000 years, Mr. Potter, and I have never once been nervous, and I find that I am a little now. What have they done to you?" "They loved me," Harry said silently inside his own head. "Is that a problem?" "It is the opposite of a problem. It is the rarest thing that has ever sat under me. Do you know what I usually find in the ones the world calls heroes? Damage. A wound, and a wound's hunger, a great gnawing need to prove or to belong or to be seen, and I sort the need mostly because the need is the loudest thing in the child. But you," the hat sounded almost aggrieved, "you have no wound I can pull on. Someone got to it first. Someone poured 7 years of love into the exact hole that makes heroes, and now I have nothing to lever against, no fear to promise safety from, no ambition to promise glory to, no loneliness to promise a family to, because you have the family, you carry it in you like a stone you're proud of. It is extraordinary. It is also extremely inconvenient. Where am I supposed to put a boy who wants for nothing? Wherever I'll do the most good," Harry offered. "That," said the hat, "is a Gryffindor answer, and you have the courage for it, buckets of it, quiet courage, the useful kind that doesn't need an audience. And you have the mind for Ravenclaw, a watching, cataloguing, patient mind, your sister's mind, half of it. And Merlin knows you have the loyalty for Hufflepuff. You die for the people who love you and never once call it a sacrifice." The hat paused. "But there is only one house for a boy who walks into a crowd that owns him, and feels nothing but calm, and picks the ground, and waits. Only one house understands power that doesn't need to shout. Only one house was built for the ones who are underestimated on purpose and never, ever correct the mistake until it is far, far too late." The hat's voice turned, and there was something almost like relish in it, the pleasure of a craftsman who has finally found the right joint. "Oh, you're not their kind of Slytherin. You have no cruelty in you at all, which will unsettle them enormously. But you are the most dangerous sort of person their house has ever produced, the sort who cannot be bought, cannot be frightened, and cannot be made small, and who smiles while you learn it. Go and confuse them. It'll be the best thing to happen to that house in a century. Slytherin." The last word rang out across the hall, and the hall, which had spent 10 years assuming the boy who lived would be a Gryffindor like his father, made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a groan, and was mostly the sound of 1,000 assumptions being revised at once. At the Slytherin table there was a silence, and then a scattering of uncertain applause, and then more, as the Green and Silver House realized that the most famous boy in Britain had just been sorted into their den, and did not yet know what to do about it. Harry took off the hat, handed it back to a faintly stunned McGonagall, said thank you, it was a pleasure, to the hat, which had never been thanked before and would talk about it for weeks, and walked down to the Slytherin table and sat and looked around at his housemates with open, friendly, unbothered interest, and the pale, pointed boy from the robe shop, 3 seats down, went slowly white. At the high table, an old man with a silver beard watched the Potter boy sit down among the serpents, and did not let his face change, and thought, behind the calm blue of his eyes, that this was not in the plan, that Slytherin was not in the plan at all, that a lonely Gryffindor hero could be shaped and steered and made ready for sacrifice, but a serene and beloved Slytherin who could not be frightened was a different and far more difficult instrument, and that he had once again underestimated Harry and the family that made him, and that he was going to have to stop doing that before it cost him everything. The Slytherin common room was under the lake. Harry loved it on sight, It was a long, low dungeon of green-lit gloom, with a ceiling of dark carved stone and windows that looked out into the black water, where pale things drifted past in the deep, and the light came through green and wavering and cold. It felt more than any room in the castle like home, like the conservatory at midnight, like a place that had made its peace with the dark long ago. Harry walked into it that first night and breathed it in and felt his shoulders come down, and several older Slytherins noticed the famous first-year looking delighted to be among them and did not know what to make of it, because new snakes were supposed to look nervous or ambitious or afraid, and this one looked unaccountably like a boy who had come home. A prefect gathered the first years by the great cold fireplace and explained in the clipped proud tones of the house that Slytherin looked after its own, that they were the house of the cunning and the great, that outside these walls the other houses and half the staff would assume the worst of them, and they would simply have to be twice as good and never let it show that it stung. It was, Harry thought, a speech built by people who had been disliked for 1,000 years and had turned the ache of it into armor, and he felt unexpectedly a great tenderness for the whole greenlit room of guarded, clever children who had been sorted for their ambition and taught to expect the world's suspicion as a birthright. "They'll say we're all going to be dark wizards," a thin second-year girl said bitterly to no one staring into the fire. "They say it every year. My brother got it. You get called a snake enough times, you start to think you'd better learn to bite. Or," said Harry from the armchair he had folded himself into unbothered, "you could not bite, I mean." Every guarded face nearby turned toward the first year who was not supposed to be talking yet. "I was raised by people the whole world calls monsters, a house full of them. And do you know the thing about being called a monster your entire life? You get to decide it's a compliment and then it can't hurt you anymore, and then when you're kind anyway, when you're kind and everyone expected fangs, it lands 10 times harder because they never saw it coming." He looked around at them, warm, easy, terribly sincere. "You're not a snake because they call you one. You're only a snake if you agree to it. I'm not planning to agree to anything I didn't choose. You're welcome to watch how that goes. Might be interesting." There was a silence in the greenlit dark. It was not a hostile silence. It was the silence of a room full of children who had been braced their whole young lives for the world to confirm the worst about them, and had just been offered by the most famous 11-year-old in Britain a different and frankly seditious idea, and did not yet know whether to trust it, but had several of them quietly tucked it somewhere warm to think about later. The thin second-year girl looked at Harry a long moment. "You're strange," she said at last, and it was not an insult quite. "Thank you," said Harry, and meant it completely, and went up to bed. The letters began the second night. Harry wrote to Wednesday first, before his mother, and Wednesday would have expected nothing less and would have been coldly furious at anything else. Hedwig carried it north to the moor and came back 2 days later with a reply in Wednesday's neat, cramped hand. And so it went, all term, a correspondence conducted with the seriousness of two field agents in hostile territory. Harry wrote, "They sorted me into the house of the ambitious and cunning. The hat said I'd confused them. It was right. There's a boy here named Draco who has spent 4 days trying to work out whether to worship me or destroy me and has settled on hovering. It's exhausting for him. I've started leaving him little openings to be decent and watching him not take them. Grandmama would call it a long game. The castle is wonderful. Something is wrong on the third-floor corridor and everyone has been told not to go there, which is the single most efficient way to make 11-year-olds go there, so I assume the staff want us to. I have not gone. Yet." Wednesday wrote back, "Good, confused them thoroughly. A house of people who all want the same thing is a house that can be turned against itself by one person who wants nothing, which is you. Use it kindly or don't, but use it. The Draco you describe is a coward raised by a crueler coward, and is therefore salvageable barely, if you can be bothered, which you will be, because you run a surplus, which I have told you about. Regarding the forbidden corridor, they have hidden something and dared the children not to find it, which means either they are fools or they are using the children as an alarm system. Assume the second. Do not be the alarm. Let a Gryffindor be the alarm. They are built for it and enjoy it. Mother sends her love and a warning that the sad orphan people will try again from a new angle once the hero angle fails. Watch for kindness that arrives with a bill. I miss having someone to not talk to. The roof is quieter and worse. Write faster. He wrote again a week later. I sat at the Gryffindor table for breakfast and the whole hall waited for the ceiling to fall. It did not. I have decided the 4 tables are a suggestion. 2 Hufflepuffs have begun to follow me around. I think I have accidentally started a movement and I don't know how to stop it or whether I ought to. Draco cried in a bathroom on Thursday. I did not do it. I did leave him alone about it, though, which is a kind of gift he has never been given and did not know how to accept. The tooth stays cold except near the man in the turban. I am being patient. It is very hard. I keep hearing your voice telling me to let the Gryffindors be the alarm." Wednesday wrote back, "You have started a movement. Good. Movements are difficult to poison, which frustrates me, but useful to command, which does not. Keep it small and keep it kind, and it will outlast every enemy you make. On Draco crying, you were right to leave it. A boy who is finally allowed to fall apart in private in front of someone who won't use it against him is a boy who will one day stand at your back when it counts. Bank him. Mother agrees. She says to tell you that patience near the man in the turban is correct, that you must not move first, that you must let him show his whole hand, and that when he does, we will already be nearer than he thinks. She has been oiling the car. I don't know what that means. I have decided not to ask. Write faster. He read her letters twice each, once for the words and once for the person, and he kept them in the false bottom of his trunk under the ticking package from Pugsley, and they were all termed the truest thing in the castle. The first weeks unspooled, and Harry moved through them as he moved through everything, unhurried and watching, and the castle slowly rearranged itself a little around the fact of him. He sat on the second Tuesday at the Gryffindor table for breakfast, beside Neville and across from Ron, which no Slytherin had done in living memory, and the hall watched him do it and waited for lightning, and no lightning came, because Harry Potter had simply decided that the 4 long tables were a suggestion, and that he intended to eat where his friends were, and there was no rule that quite forbade it, and no prefect brave enough to be the one to invent one. By the third week there were 2 Hufflepuffs and a Ravenclaw who drifted, when they thought no one was counting, to whatever table Harry had landed at, and a quiet erosion had begun in the 1,000-year-old walls between the houses, started by a boy who did not appear to be doing anything at all except being kind in a straight line. The flying lessons were on Thursdays, and Harry, who had grown up leaping off the roof of Blackpool Grange to see whether the magic would catch him, it always had, eventually, usually, took to a broom as water takes to downhill. Madam Hooch blew her whistle, and while half the class wobbled and dropped, Harry rose into the gray autumn sky over the grounds and hung there, 40 feet up, entirely at home, and looked down at the turrets and the lake and the forbidden forest with the calm proprietary interest of a boy inspecting a property, and did one slow roll just to feel it and came down laughing. "You've done that before," accused Draco, who was a fair flyer himself and hated to be second at anything. "Only off buildings," said Harry. "This is easier. Nothing's on fire and my uncle isn't timing me." He offered Draco the ghost of a grin. "You're good though, really good. Best in the class after me, and it's close. You should try enjoying it sometime instead of winning it. It's better." And he flew off before Draco could decide whether he had been complimented or insulted, which was, Harry had found, the most productive state in which to leave Draco Malfoy. Professor McGonagall, who had been watching from a window with a Scotswoman's eye for a natural, came out onto the lawn afterward and informed Harry, with the brisk severity that was her form of enthusiasm, that in 20 years she had not seen a first-year fly like that, and that it was a pity, a genuine pity, that he was in Slytherin, because she would have had him on the Gryffindor team by Friday. Harry thanked her gravely and said he would be delighted to play for whichever house would have a first year, and that he would try not to be too good against hers. McGonagall's mouth did something complicated, and she said that if he made the Slytherin team and cost her the cup she would never forgive him, and that she looked forward to it enormously, and stalked off, and it was the beginning of a rivalry she would come to treasure more than most of her friendships. Potions was on Friday mornings in a dungeon, and it was taught by a man who had been waiting 11 years to hate Harry Potter, and the collision of that hatred with an Adams-raised boy became, over the course of a single lesson, the stuff of school legend. Professor Severus Snape swept into the dungeon like a bad mood in a cloak, took the register and paused with theatrical contempt at Harry's name. "Ah yes," he said softly, his black eyes glittering, "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." He let the sneer settle over the class. The famous boy who lived come down at last from whatever Gothic hole raised him, expecting the world to hand him everything, exactly as his arrogant fool of a father did before him. He fixed Harry with a stare designed across 2 decades to reduce the son of James Potter to something small and stammering. "Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The class held its breath. Draco smirked. Snape waited for the fear. "You get the draught of living death, sir," Harry said warmly, promptly, entirely without fear, "and I have to tell you that's a wonderful name, and my grandmother would want the recipe. She collects ways to make people appear dead who aren't. It's a hobby. She'd like you, I think. You have the same delivery." He was not being cheeky. That was the disorienting thing, the thing Snape would turn over for weeks. There was no insolence in it at all, no challenge, only a genuine, sunny, appalling friendliness, the friendliness of a boy who had grown up around people far more frightening than Severus Snape and had learned to find the frightening ones endearing. "Asphodel's a lily, isn't it? A lily for the dead, and wormwood means bitterness and absence, powdered regret and bitter absence, brewed into a sleep like death." Harry looked up, green eyes bright with real appreciation. "That's not a potion, sir, that's a poem. Whoever named these was grieving something. I love this subject already, thank you." The dungeon was silent. Snape stood very still. He had prepared, across 11 years of anticipatory loathing, for arrogance, for a preening pampered princeling, for the ghost of James Potter strutting into his classroom, and he had been braced to grind it into powder. He had not prepared for Lily's eyes looking up at him out of a calm, unhurt face, telling him that the ingredients of the draught of living death were a poem about grief, and being right and meaning it and thanking him. Something crossed the sallow face that no student had ever seen there and was gone, mastered, buried. 5 points to Slytherin, Snape said at last, very quietly, and turned to the board, and did not call on Harry again for the rest of the lesson, and spent the evening in his chambers looking at a photograph he kept in a locked drawer of a red-haired girl laughing on a summer lawn a long time ago, and did not sleep. He never bullied Harry Potter. He tried for a while to be cold, and found the coldness slid off Harry like water off slate, met every time not with defiance but with an unshakable warm courtesy that gave him nothing to push against. And slowly, against his own long grievance, Severus Snape found himself in the unbearable position of a man discovering that the son of his enemy had his beloved's eyes, his beloved's kindness, and none of the arrogance he had built a decade of hatred upon, and that the child had somehow, impossibly, been raised happy in a house of monsters, into exactly the person Lily might have hoped for. It was the cruelest thing the universe had ever done to Severus Snape, and he could not even resent Harry for it, which was crueler still. Dumbledore sent for Minerva a week into term, and she came, and she stood before his desk while the portraits pretended to sleep, and she told him what she had seen, because she told him what she saw always, whatever he did with it. "He's the best adjusted child in the castle, Albus," she said. "He is kind to the Hufflepuffs and honest with the Slytherins, and he corrects Miss Granger's facts, and she thanks him for it. He has made Severus behave like a human being for the first time since the war. He is, in short, everything we could possibly want in a student, and you are sitting there looking as though I have brought you bad news." "Not bad," said Dumbledore, and steepled his long fingers and gazed into the fire. "Unexpected. There is a difference, and at my age the difference is most of what remains to me." He was quiet a moment. "I had a plan for that child, Minerva. I have had it since the night his parents died. It required certain things of him. It required a particular shape of soul, and I arranged at some cost for that shape to be pressed into him, and the arrangement failed because an unaccounted family reached him first and pressed a different shape entirely." He looked very old in the firelight. "I am not certain the new shape can do what the old shape was meant to do. I am not certain it should have to, and I find, God help me, that I am glad the arrangement failed and afraid of what my gladness will cost, and those two feelings have kept an old man awake all week." Minerva McGonagall looked at him a long moment, and there were 40 years of loyalty in the look, and something newer and colder underneath it. "You left that child in a cupboard on purpose," she said slowly, "didn't you? That's the thing you're not saying. You didn't lose him. You planted him in the worst soil you could find because you wanted him to grow up hungry." Dumbledore did not answer, which was its own answer, and Minerva stood in the firelight with the whole shape of it arriving in her at last, and she did not shout because she was not a shouting woman, but when she spoke again her voice had gone very quiet and very Scottish and very hard. "Then it is the best day's work you never meant to do, that the Addamses stole him off your doorstep," she said, "because they raised the boy you wanted broken into a child who cannot be. And if you ever try to break him yourself, Albus, to fit whatever your plan is, you will find that I resign, and I take Severus and Pomona and half your staff with me, and I write to that family on the moor and tell them exactly where you sleep. Good night." She left. Dumbledore sat alone with the fire a long time and did not sleep, and was afraid, and was, somewhere under the fear, in a chamber of himself he rarely visited, the smallest and most inconvenient bit relieved. The staff watched him, all of them, that first term, the strange calm Potter boy in the wrong house who was kind to everyone and afraid of no one and belonged, visibly, to a family, as none of the other students belonged to anything. McGonagall watched with wary approval and reported honestly to Dumbledore, as she always did. Sprout thought him a lovely boy. Flitwick found him a delight. And Professor Quirrell, the stammering, nervous young man who taught defense against the dark arts with a purple turban and a smell of garlic, watched Harry too, from under his stutter, and the watching had a different quality, a cold and hungry attention that Harry felt on the back of his neck one gray afternoon in the great hall and turned to meet, and for a moment, one moment, before Quirrell dropped his eyes and resumed his trembling. Something looked out of the young professor's face at Harry that was very old, and very patient, and not remotely afraid, and that recognized Harry and hated him, with a hatred that predated Harry's own life. Harry held the cold gaze for that single moment, and did not look away first, and felt the tooth in his coat go abruptly, warningly warm against his chest, exactly as Grandmamma had promised it would when a thing meant him harm. Then Quirrell looked down and stammered something about the weather to the professor beside him, and was a nervous young man again, and Harry sat back down among his housemates and finished his dinner, calm on the outside, as he had been raised to be. He learned more 3 nights later, by accident and by tooth. He had been coming back from the owlery after dark, later than the rules allowed, which did not trouble a boy raised to regard rules as a rough draft, when the tooth in his coat went warm again, and he stopped and stood very still in a stone alcove and listened. Two voices were coming down the empty corridor, low and sharp, one stammering and one hissing, and Harry pressed himself into the dark as he had been taught, and became, for all practical purposes, part of the wall. "Don't know what you mean," Quirrell was saying, and there was no stammer in it now, none at all, until he remembered to put it back. "You know perfectly well what I mean." That was Snape, cold and quiet and dangerous. "You've been asking Hagrid how one gets past his ridiculous three-headed beast. You've been where you had no business being. I'm watching you, Quirrell. I don't yet know what you're after up on the third floor, behind the dog and the trapdoor. But I know it's being guarded for a reason, and I know you want it, and I have decided to make your life extremely difficult until you stop." A pause. "We'll have another little chat soon, when you've had time to decide where your loyalties lie." Footsteps. Harry held still until both sets had faded, and then he stood alone in the dark corridor and put the pieces together as his family had taught him, quickly and coldly, and without wanting them to be true. A three-headed dog, a trapdoor, a thing worth guarding on the forbidden third floor, a professor with something ancient and hateful living under his turban, and a potions master who had appointed himself the castle's suspicious conscience, and did not yet understand that the thing he was watching Quirrell for was very much larger than Quirrell. Harry did not go to the third floor that night. Grandmama had told him that if a room felt wrong you left it, and the whole third-floor corridor felt wrong from where he stood, wrong in the deep old way the tooth confirmed, and he was in no hurry because his family did not do things in a hurry. They did them thoroughly and at a time of their own choosing and with the whole family present. So he went down to the dungeons and lit a candle and got out parchment and wrote the most important letter he had sent all year. "The man in the turban," he wrote, "is not one man. The tooth went hot when he looked at me, and it has never done that once all term, not for Snape, not for the corridor, not for anything. Grandmama said the tooth would tell me. It told me. There is something wearing a professor the way you wear a coat, and it knows me, and I think Wednesday I know who it is, because there is only one person in the world who would look at me out of a stranger's face with that much old cold patience, and my mother told me he wasn't as dead as everyone hoped. I'm not frightened. I want you to know that first, before you read the rest and decide to come. I'm not frightened. But I think the thing that killed my first mother is teaching Tuesday afternoons on the second floor, and I think it's here for something in this castle, and I think, before the year is out, it and I are going to have a conversation. Send instructions, and tell Mother." He sealed the letter and gave it to Hedwig, and opened the window of the dungeon that looked out under the black lake, and watched the great white owl beat away north into the dark, carrying the news toward a house on a moor where, he knew, it would not be met with fear. It would be met, he thought, with something far more dangerous and far more like home. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, Old Men and Their Schemes. The troll came in on Halloween, and Harry Adams dealt with it as he had been raised to deal with a large stupid thing that wanted to hurt someone he liked, which is to say calmly, thoroughly, and with a candlestick. He had known something was wrong before Professor Quirrell burst into the great hall shrieking about a troll in the dungeons, and fainting theatrically onto the flagstones, because the tooth in his coat had gone warm during the feast, warmer than it had gone for the troll, warm in the specific direction of the fainting professor, and Harry had understood at once that the troll was not the emergency. The troll was the distraction. Someone had let a mountain troll loose in the castle to empty a corridor, and the corridor they wanted emptied was on the third floor, and Harry, sitting among the pumpkins and the floating candles with his family's whole education arranged quietly behind his eyes, thought, he's making his move and he's using a troll to do it, and everyone is about to run in exactly the wrong direction. Then he remembered that Hermione Granger was not in the hall. She had run off crying that afternoon over something Ron had said and had not come to the feast, and she was, Harry realized with the cold, clean certainty his family prized above all other kinds, in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, alone, directly in the path of a mountain troll that was even now being herded upstairs, away from the dungeons, toward the very place a frightened Muggle-born girl had gone to cry. He was moving before the prefects finished shouting. He did not tell a teacher. Teachers were running the wrong way toward the dungeons, exactly as intended. He slipped out of the hall in the chaos, unremarkable, a boy who had spent 7 years learning to become part of a wall, and he went up against the flow toward the second floor, and he found Hermione's bathroom as he found lost toads, by the warm green pull of a living thing in danger, and he got there the same moment the troll did. It was 12 feet of gray muscle and rolling stink, a club the size of Harry dragging from one fist, and it had backed Hermione into a corner of shattered sinks, and she was screaming, and it raised the club. Harry did not scream. Screaming, his family had taught him, was a thing you did for pleasure at parties, never in an emergency, because in an emergency it wasted breath you needed for other things. He assessed the room in the time it took the club to reach the top of its arc. The troll's weight was on its back foot, its knee was locked, the flagstones under it were wet from the burst pipes, and there was a broken length of iron pipe within reach that would do in a pinch, for the sort of work Gomez had trained him in with a saber and Wednesday with anything at all. "Hey," Harry said, quite loudly, quite calmly, and the troll turned its tiny red eyes toward him, and that was the point. That was always the point in the fencing, Sal. You made the big stupid thing commit. What followed took 9 seconds and became, in the retelling, a legend that grew a foot in every dormitory it passed through. Harry moved. He went in low and to the side, off the troll's committed swing, exactly as he had gone in on Gomez 1,000 mornings, and the club came down where he had been and shattered a sink instead, and Harry came up inside the troll's reach where the club could not follow, and he did 3 things very fast that his family had drilled into his body until they lived below thought. He swept the iron pipe hard into the back of the locked knee, so the leg buckled. He seized the falling troll's own club arm and used its momentum, all 12 feet of it, to steer its enormous head down toward the wet flagstones as it fell. And he was already stepping clear, pulling Hermione with him by the collar, when the troll's skull met the stone with a sound like a cathedral bell being dropped down a well, and the whole gray mountain of it went still. In the ringing silence, Harry helped Hermione up, checked her for injury with brisk, gentle hands the way Grandmama had taught him, and said, you're all right, it's asleep. It'll have an awful headache and it'll deserve it. Breathe, there you are." He picked her wand up off the wet floor and put it back in her shaking hand. "You did the right thing, screaming. It kept its eyes on you long enough for me to get behind it. You were bait and you didn't even know it, and you were excellent at it. Wednesday will want to meet you." That was the moment, Hermione would say for the rest of her life, that she stopped being frightened of Harry Potter and started being loyal to him, because he had not made her feel rescued. He had made her feel like his accomplice. When McGonagall and Snape and Quirrell arrived at a run, white-faced, they found a downed troll, an unharmed Muggle-born girl, and a first-year Slytherin sitting on a broken sink swinging his heels, entirely composed, who explained the situation in 4 clear sentences, and then added mildly, watching Quirrell the whole time, that it was very odd for a troll to come all the way up from the dungeons to the 2nd floor by itself, wasn't it? Almost as if something had wanted the dungeons and this floor watched at the same time, and that he did hope no one had used the excitement to visit anywhere they oughtn't. Quirrell's stammer got worse. Snape's black eyes moved from the troll to Harry to Quirrell and back to Harry, and something passed across the potion's master's face that was, for the first time, not hatred, but the wary respect of one clever, suspicious person recognizing another. The story of it went around the school by morning, growing as it went, and by dinner the next day the first years were saying that Harry Potter had killed a mountain troll with his bare hands, and by the end of the week the 6th years were saying it too, more quietly, which was worse. Harry corrected no one because his family had taught him that a reputation you did not build yourself was the cheapest armor there was, and only a fool refused free armor. Hermione and Ron attached themselves to him permanently after that night, Gryffindors both, trailing a Slytherin around the castle in open defiance of 1,000 years of house feeling, and the 4 of them, with Neville, became an odd, unbreakable little unit the school had no category for and eventually stopped trying to find one. Wednesday's only comment on the troll when the letter reached the moor was this: "You steered a 12-foot creature into killing itself with its own weight, rescued a girl, and made it look like an accident of physics. I have never been prouder. Send me the Granger girl's address. Anyone who can be bait without flinching is someone I wish to correspond with. Tell her I do not lend Marie Antoinette to anyone, so she needn't ask." The Quidditch came in November, and with it the 2nd attempt, and this one nearly worked. Harry had made the Slytherin team as seeker, the youngest in a century, over the strenuous objection of exactly no one once they had watched him fly, and he took the pitch on a cold, bright Saturday against Gryffindor with the calm of a boy who had been leaping off towers his whole life. The stands were a roar of green and scarlet. And high above, on the topmost bench, wrapped in black against the cold and entirely unmissable, sat a small delegation from a certain moor, because Gomez Addams had read that his son was to compete in a sport played on flying furniture at lethal height and had declared that wild hippogriffs could not keep him away. "That's my boy," Gomez bellowed at intervals throughout the match to the alarm of the surrounding Gryffindors. "Look at him, 50 feet up and not a safety line in sight. Tish, he magnificent. He gets it from your side, mon cher," said Morticia, who was watching the game, and also watching with a stiller and more particular attention the staff box across the pitch, where a young professor in a purple turban had begun, very quietly, to mutter. The trouble began 20 minutes in when Harry's broom gave a lurch. It bucked under him once, then again, then began to buck in earnest, trying to throw him, rolling and jerking 100 feet above the pitch with a violence no ordinary broom possessed. In the stands, people began to point. Harry gripped the handle with both hands and his knees and understood, with the cold part of his mind that never panicked because it had been trained out of him by a family who found panic vulgar, that this was a curse, a sustained one, someone in the crowd holding his broom in the air and shaking it like a terrier, and that he had at most a minute before it succeeded. Across the pitch, 2 things happened at once. Severus Snape in the staff box had fixed his eyes on Harry's plunging broom and begun, under his breath, to mutter the steady counter-curse of a man who had decided, at some point in the last month and against every grievance of his life, that the son of Lily Evans was not going to die on his watch. And in the topmost bench, Morticia Addams had gone very still and very cold and had located the source. She did not have a wand, she had never needed one. She lifted one pale gloved hand, and she looked across the crowded pitch at the muttering young man in the turban. And she did the old deep thing her family had never stopped doing, the thing that was less a spell than a decision the world agreed to honor, and every candle flame in the nearest torch bracket bent sideways toward Quirrell, blown by a wind only he could feel that had risen at his back, and the fire whispered against his ear in a voice like a grandmother's, and Quirrell, startled, lost his eyeline and his rhythm and his footing, and knocked into the professor beside him and broke his curse. Between Snape's counter and Morticia's colder one, the broom steadied. Harry, who had ridden it out with the patience of a boy who had fallen off the roof of Blackpool Grange more times than he could count and always, eventually, been caught, felt it come back under his control, and did not waste the moment being relieved. He looked up. The snitch was hanging in the cold air 10 feet above him, gold and fluttering, waiting, and Harry Adams stood up on the footrests of his broom, which you were absolutely never supposed to do, exactly as he had stood on the flat lead roof between the towers 1,000 times, and he plucked it out of the sky with one hand and Slytherin won, and the entire pitch lost its mind. And up in the topmost bench Gomez Addams fainted with joy and had to be revived by Grandmamma with something from her shawl. Harry came down to earth to find his family waiting at the edge of the pitch, and his father seized him and wept and called him the finest athlete in the history of any sport, and his mother took his face in her cool hands and looked at him a long moment and said low only for him, "The man in the turban tried to kill you today, my darling, in front of 1,000 people, which means he has stopped being careful, which means he is running out of time. Whatever he wants in this castle, he wants it soon." She kissed his forehead once over the scar. "We are watching now, all of us. You are not to face him alone. When it comes, and it is coming, you send Hedwig and you hold on, and we will be there before you finish the sentence. Do you understand me?" "Yes, mother," said Harry, and he did, and it steadied him more than any counter-curse. Severus Snape found Harry 2 days after the match in an empty corridor after curfew and did not take points, which was itself remarkable. "You were seen out of bounds," Snape said from the shadows, his black robes making him a piece of the dark. "As usual, I could make your life difficult, Potter. It is one of my few remaining pleasures." "You could," Harry agreed pleasantly. "You won't, though. You've decided I'm not the enemy. You decided it during the match, when you sat in that box muttering a counter-curse to keep me on my broom while a man you distrust tried to shake me off it." He looked at the sallow, unreadable face. "Thank you for that, sir. You didn't have to. You've hated me since before you met me on my father's account, and you kept me alive anyway, and I'd like you to know I noticed, and that I don't hold the hating against you, because I think you had your reasons, and I think they had green eyes." Snape went very still in the dark. "You know nothing," he said at last, very low, "about my reasons." "I know my mother's name was Lily," Harry said gently, "and I know you say it in your sleep, according to a portrait my mother interviewed, and I know you look at me and see the wrong parent mostly, but sometimes, when I say something kind, you see the right one, and it's the worst moment of your day every day, and I'm sorry for it, sir, I truly am. I didn't ask to have her eyes. But I've decided that if I have to carry them into a room, I'd rather carry them to someone who loved her than to someone who didn't." He held out his hand, the way a man had once held one out to him in a churchyard. "I'm not my father, I'm not even really a Potter anymore. I'm an Addams, but she's in me somewhere, the woman who stepped in front of the curse, and if you were her friend, then you and I are on the same side, and I would rather you knew it." Severus Snape looked at the outstretched hand of the son of James Potter and Lily Evans, and at the green eyes of the only person who had ever been kind to him without wanting a single thing in return, looking back out of a face that was, cruelly, half of each, and he did not take the hand because he was Severus Snape and there were limits, but he looked at it a long moment, and something in the frozen country of the man shifted, 1 single degree, the first thaw in a decade. "Watch Quirrell," Snape said, "instead of anything else, instead of everything else. He is not what he pretends. There is a thing in this castle he means to steal tonight or soon, and he will kill anyone who stands between him and it, including you, especially you." He drew his robes about him. "I cannot always be in the box, Potter," muttering, "do not make me try." And he turned and swept off into the dark and did not take a single point, and Harry watched him go and understood that he had just been, in the only language the man had left, thanked and warned, and in some buried, unbearable way, cared for on his mother's account, which was the one account Severus Snape had never once let close. But it was the letter after Christmas that changed everything, because it was the letter that told Harry the whole of it, and after it he could no longer pretend the old man with the sad eyes was only careless. Christmas itself had been a masterpiece of misdirection, and Harry had admired it even as he saw through it. On Christmas morning there had been a parcel at the foot of his bed with no name on the giver's card, only a line of looping green ink. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." Inside had been a cloak of shimmering silver gray that turned Harry invisible when he drew it on, an invisibility cloak, a true one, a deathless heirloom, and it was a magnificent and priceless and deeply generous gift, and it was also, Harry understood the instant he held it, a lure. "He's giving me a tool," Harry wrote to Wednesday that night, "and telling me my dead father wanted me to have it, and returning it to me now this year, the year something is guarded on the third floor and a man in a turban is hunting it. He wants me to explore. He wants me under this cloak, invisible, poking at the edges of the thing he's guarding, testing myself against it. He's not protecting me from the mystery. He's steering me into it. My whole life he's arranged where I'd be and what I'd have to grow up hard for, and now he's handing me my father's ghost wrapped in silver and pointing me at a locked door. I'm not going to be pointed, but I kept the cloak. It's beautiful, and it was my father's, and I refuse to let the old man ruin a good cloak by having ulterior motives about it. I'll use it when I decide to, at a time of my choosing, with the whole family present. Grandmama would be proud." Wednesday wrote back within 2 days, and her hand was smaller and harder than usual, which Harry had learned meant that she was angry and being precise about it. "Keep the cloak," she wrote. "He's right that it's a lure and you're right that it's a good cloak. Both can be true, and that is exactly what makes him dangerous. But understand what he has just told you by giving it to you now. He is done waiting. A man does not hand a boy his dead father's invisibility and point him at a locked door unless he has decided the end game is near and wants his piece in position. He is moving you into place, Harry. Which means the thing behind the door is going to be moved for soon by someone. I have shown Mother your letter. She has stopped smiling, which you know is the serious one. Father has taken the swords down off the ballroom wall and is polishing them and singing. Grandmama is making the kind of provisions that keep on a long journey. And I have not slept because every night I lie awake calculating how fast Lurch can get the car from the moor to Scotland, and the answer is never fast enough, so I have begun calculating how to make it faster. And I believe that if we leave the roads for the last stretch and Father drives, we save an hour, and I intend to spend that hour standing next to you. Send the owl the instant it begins. Not after you have handled it. During, I mean this. I claimed you out of the rain, and I am not going to lose you to a locked door in Scotland because you were too polite to interrupt your own murder to write to me. He had used it once that lonely Christmas week, and it had led him, the way such things do in that castle, to an empty room and a great mirror in a dusty frame, tall as the ceiling, gold-wrought, with words carved around the top that read backward. And in the mirror Harry had seen himself, and behind himself, arranged in the dusty glass, his family, all of them, Morticia and Gomez and Wednesday and Pugsley and Fester and Grandmama and Lurch and Thing. And behind them, one hand each on his shoulders, a smiling man in glasses and a red-haired woman with his own green eyes, James and Lily Potter, both his mother's and both his father's, and the whole impossible warm crowd of the living and the dead who had loved him, all together, all looking at him. Harry had looked at it a long time. It was the mirror of Eris, though he did not know the name yet. It showed the deepest desire of the heart, and what it showed Harry was simply everyone, not power, not glory, not his parents restored alone the way it would have shown a lonelier boy. Showed his whole enormous found family, both halves of it, the graveyard family and the moor family, standing together behind him, and Harry had understood, gazing at it, that this was the difference between him and the man who had set this mirror in his path, because the man had surely watched somewhere, expecting the orphan boy to be caught by it, trapped by longing, undone by the sight of the family he could never have. But Harry already had the family. The mirror was not showing him something impossible. It was showing him something true. He had turned away from it unbroken, and had felt, walking back to the dungeons under his father's cloak, the eyes of the old man on him from some hidden vantage, and had known that Dumbledore had just watched his cleverest trap fail, because you cannot ensnare a boy with a picture of the thing he already has. "It shows the deepest desire of our hearts," said a soft voice from the shadows by the door, and Harry did not startle, because the tooth had told him the old man was there, and had told him it was only the old man, which was a different kind of danger from the one in the turban, but a danger all the same. Albus Dumbledore came forward into the mirror's dim gold light, and he looked at the reflection over Harry's shoulder, at the crowd of the living and the dead arranged there, and something crossed his ancient face that he did not trouble to hide, because he had learned that Harry saw through hiding. "I confess I hope to find you here," Dumbledore said. "I have watched this mirror ensnare wiser men than you, Harry. They have wasted away before it, forgetting to eat, forgetting to sleep, unable to look away from the thing they wanted most and could not have. I thought, when I placed your father's cloak in your hands and let the castle draw you where it draws the curious, that I might learn a great deal about you from what the mirror showed." He was quiet a moment. "It has shown me a great deal, not what I expected." "You wanted to know what would trap me," Harry said. He did not turn around. He watched the old man in the glass instead, both Mother's hands on his shoulders in the reflection. "What I'd starve myself in front of, what I want so badly I'd forget to be careful." He tilted his head. "You've spent my whole life trying to find the shape of the hole in me, Professor, the one you put there on purpose, and the mirror was meant to show you the hole." He gestured gently at the reflected crowd. It showed you this instead. It showed you that there isn't a hole, someone filled it. And now you don't know what to do with me, because a boy with no unbearable longing is a boy you cannot lead by it. Dumbledore looked at the poised child and the impossible warm family in the glass, and he was silent for a long moment, an old man in a cold room confronted once again with the total failure of a 50-year design. No, he admitted at last softly, I do not. It is a strange thing, Harry, to have arranged a boy's whole life around a wound, and to arrive at last to inspect the wound, and to find it healed by strangers, and to feel that I ought to be grateful, and to feel instead, God forgive me, a kind of grief, because a healed boy is so much harder to ask great and terrible things of than a wounded one. He met Harry's eyes in the glass. I am going to have to tell you the truth eventually, you understand, the whole of it, about the prophecy and what it asks. I have been putting it off. I told myself it was to protect you. I begin to think it was to protect my plan from you, which is a different and less noble thing, and your mother, I suspect, has already told you the difference. She has, said Harry. She tells me everything. It's the whole point of her. He turned at last and looked at the old man directly, green eyes steady and not unkind. I already know most of it, Professor, the prophecy, the cupboard, the seasoning. I know what you were raising me to be willing to do, and I want you to hear me because you're clever enough to actually hear it. I will fight the thing that killed my mother. I have decided that on my own because it is mine to decide, not because you arranged for me to have nothing else. But I will never, ever do it your way, alone and hollow and grateful for the chance to die. I'll do it their way. He nodded once at the mirror, at the crowd of them. Surrounded, loved, surviving on purpose. You built your plan on a lonely boy, sir. There isn't one. There is only me, and behind me there is an army of the strangest people in England, and they are all coming, and you are going to have to make your peace with that, because I already have. The letter came a week into the new term. It was from Morticia, and it was longer than her letters usually were, and it was written in the cold, clear hand she used only for the 2 or 3 genuinely important things, and it laid the whole of it out. My darling, she wrote, I have been busy while you have been at school. You know that your mother does not sit quietly. I have been asking questions of goblins who owe us, and of certain very old families who fear us, and of the dead, who are chattier than the living and hold fewer grudges once you have got past the initial coldness. And I have learned what your headmaster has been keeping from you, and I am going to tell you all of it because you are 11, and because a truth withheld to protect you is only a leash with a kinder name. There was a prophecy, Harry, made before you were born. It named a child who would have the power to destroy the man who killed your first parents, and it was spoken to your headmaster, and he believed it meant you. That is why the man came for you. That is why your mother died. Here is the part your headmaster has never said aloud, the part I had from a portrait who was in the room and a goblin who audited the accounts. He did not merely place you with your aunt for protection. He placed you there in that specific cold house, and he arranged that no one would intervene, because he had decided that the child of the prophecy must grow up humble and unloved and hungry, so that when the hour came, the child would be willing to walk into death for a world that had given him nothing. He was not hiding you, my love, he was seasoning you like a joint of meat, for a sacrifice he has been planning since you were 1 year old. He failed because we found you and we ruined his recipe, and I have never in my long life been so glad of anything. But I want you to understand the man you are dealing with. He is not cruel. That is what makes him dangerous. He is a man who has convinced himself that his kindness and his calculation are the same organ, and he grieves the children he sacrifices sincerely, and sacrifices them anyway, for the greater good, which is the phrase men use when they have decided that a real child's real life is an acceptable price for an idea. He loves you a little, I think, now that he has met you. It will not stop him. It never has. Love did not stop him leaving you in a cupboard for the sake of a plan. It will not stop him spending you for the sake of one either when he judges the moment right. So, here is what you will do. You will be careful, and you will be patient, and you will not walk into that guarded corridor to prove anything to anyone. And the moment the man in the turban moves for whatever is behind that door, you will send Hedwig, and you will hold your ground, and you will not be brave alone, because being brave alone is a thing lonely boys do, and you are not a lonely boy, you are our boy, and we do not let our children die for other people's plans. We are coming to Scotland. We have been packing for a week. Your father has oiled every blade in the house, and your grandmother has been cooking things that travel. When it begins, we will already be on the moor road, all my love and none of my patience which I have spent. Mother. Harry read the letter 3 times. Then he sat for a long while on his green-curtained bed under the black lake, holding it, and the thing that moved in him was not the grief the old man had spent a decade cultivating, and it was not the rage the letter might have lit in a differently raised boy. It was something colder and steadier and far more useful, the thing his whole strange childhood had been quietly building in him against exactly this day. The settled, unfrightened resolve of a person who knows precisely what he is, and who loves him, and who does not. Far to the south on the moor, the letter's twin was being lived out in the great cold drawing-room of Blackpool Grange, where Morticia Addams stood at the tall window with the packed trunks ranged behind her and Gomez at her shoulder, and neither of them was smiling, and the fire had burned low because no one had thought to feed it. He was going to spend our son, Gomez said. It was not a question. He had read the portrait's account and the goblin's ledger in his wife's cold face, and there was none of the exuberance in him now. None at all, only the low still thing that lived at the bottom of Gomez Addams under all the joy, the thing that had made even Valdemore's servants, in their few unlucky dealings with the old families, learn not to knock twice. He looked at a baby, our baby, and he did the arithmetic, and the answer he got was cupboard. And then he sat in his tower for 10 years being wise. Yes, said Morticia, and when we take Harry home from all this, Gomez went on very quietly, as we will because we always do, this old man will still be sitting in his tower, wise, grieving, certain he meant well. He turned his wife toward him gently, and there was murder in his dark eyes, the fond, patient family kind. I find I would like to visit his tower, cara mia, after, when the children are safe. I would like to explain some things to him in person about arithmetic. After, Morticia agreed and laid her cool hand against her husband's cheek, and for a moment the two of them stood in the cold firelight, the light of one another's lives and the shadow on one another's graves, contemplating the specific and unhurried education of Albus Dumbledore with a tenderness that would have stopped the chief warlock's heart in his chest had he been in the room to feel it. After, first, the children. Lurch has the car. Wednesday has not slept in 3 days. She has been sharpening things and refusing supper. We leave the moment Hedwig comes. Upstairs in the best bedroom in the house, Wednesday Addams sat cross-legged on her black coverlet with a whetstone and a blade and a window full of stars. And she did not sharpen the knife because it needed sharpening, for it had been lethal for hours, but because the motion kept her hands from doing something less dignified while she waited for the owl that would tell her that her brother, her own kind, the one she had claimed out of the rain when she was 5, was finally in the danger she had promised, under a dying moon, that she would never let the world hand him alone. Soon, she told the stars flatly. Come on, send the owl, Harry. I've a full schedule and you're the only thing on it. Downstairs, the house was making ready in its own fashion. Fester had spent the week in the cellar with the reanimator, not because it worked but because tinkering steadied him, and had emerged with a device he described only as a surprise for anyone who touches the boy, which glowed and hummed, and which Morticia had permitted into the car on the strict condition that it be kept well away from Pugsley. Grandmamma had cooked. The kitchen table groaned under provisions that would keep for a month and travel without complaint and in 2 or 3 cases defend themselves. Pugsley had packed his entire chemistry set in a spare, been made to unpack the spare and repacked it in secret, because a boy going to help his brother did not go empty-handed. Lurch had the hearse gleaming and fueled and pointed north down the drive. And Thing rode on the dashboard, tapping, counting the hours, an impatient sentry keeping watch for a white owl in the dark. They were not a frightened household. Frightened was not a thing this family had ever learned how to be. They were something the wizarding world had no word for and would shortly be taught. A family that had been told plainly that a man meant to spend their child, and had decided plainly, without ever raising their voices, to go and prevent it, and to be, on the whole, extremely thorough about whatever came after. At Hogwarts, the thing behind the door on the 3rd floor began at last to matter to everyone, because Hagrid let slip over tea that the great 3-headed dog belonged to him and was called Fluffy and could be soothed to sleep with music, and because the professors began to look gray and sleepless, and because Harry, watching Quirrell across the great hall with the tooth warm and steady against his chest, saw the young professor stop stammering for whole seconds at a time now. As though whatever wore him was tired of the disguise and close to no longer needing it. Spring turned to a hot, bright June. Exams came and went. Harry sat them calmly and did well and did not care, because his attention was on the thing under the trapdoor and the man who wanted it and the tooth that had not gone cold in weeks. And then on the evening the whole thing broke open. Harry came up from an exam to find Hagrid guilty and enormous and miserable, and got out of the great man in 10 minutes of gentle Addams, questioning the fact that a hooded stranger had won a dragon's egg off him in a card game by asking ever so casually how one got past a 3-headed dog, and that Hagrid had told him that music did it, that you only had to play the beast a little tune and it fell fast asleep. And Harry stood in the warm June dusk with the last piece in his hand, and put the picture together the way his family had built him to, cold and fast and complete. The guard was compromised, the dog could be sung to sleep by anyone who knew the trick, the man in the turban knew the trick now. The headmaster had been called away that very afternoon on urgent ministry business that was almost certainly a forgery, and the thing behind the door, whatever it was about to be taken tonight by the oldest and coldest patient hatred in the country, wearing a young man like a coat. He did not go to a teacher. The one teacher who might have listened was Snape, and Snape was already watching Quirrell, and Snape did not know what Harry knew, which was that Quirrell was not the true enemy but only the door the true enemy had walked through, and that this was a matter too old and too deep for the Wandan Latin wizards, a matter for the old families, for the deep magic, for a boy raised in a house that laughed at death and the people who had raised him. He found Ron and Hermione and Neville in the library and told them, because they were his friends and friends were owed the truth, that something was going to happen that night and that they were not to follow him, and that this was not because he doubted them but because he loved them and because his family kept a rule older than the ministry, that you did not spend the people who loved you on a fight that was yours to hold. But we could help, Hermione protested. We could come. There are 4 of us. There are about to be 9 of me, said Harry, and every one of them has been doing this since before your grandparents were born. This isn't a job for the brave, Hermione. It's a job for the terrifying, and I was raised by the most terrifying people in England, and they're already on the road. He looked at the 3 of them, the round anxious face and the freckled loyal one and the bushy determined one, the first friends he had ever made who were not his own kind and had chosen him anyway. You want to help, stay alive, stay here, be the people I come back to. That's the job. It's the hardest one, and I'm giving it to you because I trust you with it. And they argued and lost because you did not win an argument with an Addams about who was permitted to protect whom, and in the end they let him go, and watched him walk out of the library into the June dusk and were afraid for him, and did not know that being afraid for Harry Potter was the single most unnecessary emotion available anywhere in Britain that night. He went to the owlery. Hedwig was already awake, already watching the door, already knowing, the way the creatures around Harry always knew. Tonight, Harry told her, and tied the shortest letter he had ever written to her leg, 3 words in his own steady hand, and opened the window on the warm dark. Fly, Hedwig, fly like the whole family's lives depend on it, because tonight I rather think they do. She was gone into the dusk like a thrown white star north toward the moor, and Harry watched her out of sight, and then he turned and went down through the sleeping castle toward the 3rd-floor corridor, and the forbidden door and the thing behind it, unafraid, unhurried, and Adams walking to meet the dark on his own 2 feet, and holding it only until his family could arrive. On the moor road, 40 minutes later, a great black car came alive in the dark, and a white owl dropped through the open window into a woman's waiting gloved hand, and Morticia Addams read 3 words by the dashboard light and said, "Lurch." Now, and the hearse leapt forward into the night with the whole strange family inside it, and every blade in the house oiled, and a girl in the back seat who had not smiled in a week, finally, terribly, doing so. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The family stands together. The 3-headed dog was the size of a cottage, and it was awake, and it had 6 eyes and a great deal of teeth and a smell that could be filed under weather, and Harry Potter walked up to it in the dark of the 3rd-floor corridor and said, "Hello, you must be Fluffy. Hagrid speaks very highly of you." All 3 heads swung toward him and growled a growl that came up through the floor. Harry took the little harp out of his coat, the one he had transfigured that afternoon from a music box after Hagrid's slip about the tune, and he did not play it well because he had never learned the harp, but he did not need to play it well. He needed only to play it warmly, and Harry had grown up in a house where the enormous frightening thing was always, underneath, only lonely, and he played the great dog a slow, soft, clumsy lullaby of the kind Lurch played on the organ on the worst nights of the moor. And all 3 heads slowed and drooped, and one by one the 6 eyes closed, and the beast that guarded the trapdoor lay down across its own paws and began hugely to snore. "Good dog," said Harry, and stepped over a paw the size of his torso, and heaved up the ring of the trapdoor, and dropped down into the dark. What waited below would have killed a wizard who panicked, and it had been designed by wizards who assumed the intruder would be a wizard, and so it had not been designed for Harry. The first chamber was a mass of writhing green tendrils that seized his ankles and wrists and began, purposefully, to strangle and drag, and a Hogwarts child would have thrashed, and thrashing was how the devil's snare killed you. Harry did not thrash. He went limp and calm and warm, and reached for the plant with the warm green scents behind his breastbone, the one that had loved growing things since before he could speak, and he said silently, kindly to the plant that he understood it, that it was only doing what it was, that Cleopatra back home would have adored it, and that if it would let him pass he would tell it honestly that it was the finest strangling vine he had ever met. And the devil's snare, which had never in its life been complimented, loosened, and let the strange, gentle boy who smelled of graveyards slip down through it into the room below. He rested a moment in the dim room below the snare, and reached into his coat and touched the tooth, warm and steady, and the knot of Grandmamma's hair and the little pouch of graveyard salt, and he thought about the hearse on the moor road, closing the distance in the dark, his whole family packed into it and coming, and the thought did for him what it had always done, which was to make the enormous dark chamber feel less like a place he had been sent to die, and more like a place he had chosen to wait. He was not brave exactly. Bravery was for people who were afraid and did the thing anyway. Harry was simply not afraid, because fear is what happens to a person who believes at the bottom of themselves that they are alone, and Harry had not believed that since he was 4 years old and a girl in a graveyard had handed him a headless doll and told him he was her own kind. He had come down here to hold a door until his family arrived. It was, looked at squarely, the most ordinary chore in the world, the sort of thing any member of the household would do for any other without being asked, and he went on down through the castle's clever, murderous puzzles in the calm, unhurried way of a boy running an errand, because that, in the end, was all it was. He passed the room of flying keys by standing very still and simply feeling for the one that fought its cage differently from the others, the frightened one, and holding out his hand until it came to him. He passed the giant chessboard by walking straight across it while the great stone pieces loomed, because he had understood at a glance that the board only killed those who tried to play its game, and Harry declined to play games he had not chosen, a policy his mother had instilled in him at 4. He passed the troll already downed by someone ahead of him, and the table of potions and the riddle in logic, which he read once and solved in the calm way Wednesday had taught him to solve everything, by assuming the person who said it was cleverer than you and less kind than they seemed. And he drank the small vial that carried a body forward through the black fire, and he walked through the flames into the last chamber, and there at last, in the flickering dark, he found the thing that had killed his mother. And it was wearing Professor Quirrell like a coat. Quirrell stood before the great gold mirror of Eris, turban gone, and he turned as Harry came through the fire, and his face was wrong and getting wronger, and his voice, when he spoke, was two voices layered badly over each other. "Harry Potter," said Quirrell, and smiled, and it was not Quirrell's smile. "I wondered whether you would come. I hoped you would. He wants to see you. He has wanted to see you for a very long time." "I know," said Harry. He stood easy in the firelight, hands loose at his sides, the tooth in his coat gone scalding against his chest, and he looked at the ruined man and the wrongness behind his eyes with the calm total attention his family had spent 7 years teaching him, and he was not afraid, and the not being afraid was the truest thing he owned. "You're the man who's been wearing him, the one my mother told me about, the one who made himself into a horror because he was frightened of dying." He tilted his head. "You're smaller than the stories, they always are," the two-layered voice hissed. And then Quirrell reached up and unwound the last of the cloth from the back of his head, and turned, and where the back of his skull should have been there was a face. A terrible, flat, white face with red eyes and slits for a nose pushing out through the skin, and it looked at Harry across the firelit chamber, and it spoke, and its voice was cold, colder than the moor in winter, colder than anything in the house that had raised him, a cold with no warmth anywhere underneath it. Which was the one kind of cold the Addamses had never taught Harry to be cozy with, because it was the only kind that was truly, finally dead. "See what I have become," said Lord Voldemort out of the back of a stolen head. "See what I had to become to survive that night, the night your mother threw her life away for nothing, mere shadow and vapor. I have form only when I can share another's body. But there are those who will let me into their hearts and minds," and Quirrell was so easy, so hungry, so afraid. "The stone will make me whole again, and you, Harry Potter, are going to help me find it, because it is here, behind this glass, and the glass will show me where, and you are going to look into it and tell me what you see." "No," said Harry, "I don't think I am." "You will look," said the cold voice, and Quirrell moved, quick and jerking like a puppet on fouled strings, and seized Harry by the shoulders and turned him bodily to face the great gold glass and held him there. "Use the child," it hissed to itself. "He is pure. He does not want it for himself. Perhaps that is the trick of it. Look, Potter, look into the mirror and tell me what you see." Harry looked into the mirror of Eris. He saw himself as he had seen himself at Christmas, with his whole vast family arranged behind him, the graveyard family and the moor family, and both his first parents with their hands on his shoulders. But this time the reflection did something the real Harry did not. The reflected Harry reached into his own coat pocket, drew out a blood-red stone, smiled, put it back, and gave the real Harry the smallest possible nod, one keeper of secrets to another. And at that exact instant Harry felt a weight settle into his real pocket, heavy and warm, arriving out of nowhere and everywhere at once, because the mirror had been built by a man clever enough to hide a thing so that only a person who wanted to find it and never, ever use it could ever take it out, and Harry Adams, who had been raised by people who thought living forever was an appalling taste, was very possibly the only person in Britain who qualified. "Well," the cold voice demanded. "What do you see, boy? Tell me, do not lie to me, I will know." It did not know. That was the thing about liars who trusted their own certainty. They could always be lied to because they believed themselves far too clever to be. Harry had learned that at the family dinner table before he could properly read. "I see myself," Harry said truthfully, "surrounded by my family, all of them, living and dead, standing behind me." He let the cold thing hear the truth of it and take it for the whole of it. "That's my heart's desire. That's what the mirror shows, not the stone. I don't want the stone. I've never once wanted to live forever. Why would I? I've got exactly the life I'd want to end for. That's the whole point of a good life, my mother says. It gives you something worth stopping for." Behind the cold face, deep in whatever passed for its mind, Lord Voldemort raged, because the child was useless to him, because it did not desire the stone, and a person who did not desire the stone could not be made to draw it from the glass. And the plan, the year's careful, patient plan, had died in the last room on the wanting of a child who already had everything he wanted. And then the red eyes, staring past Harry into the glass, saw what the glass had just done, saw the reflected boy tuck a red stone away, and understood that the real one now carried it. The cold voice changed. It went for a moment almost soft, almost kind, with the softness of a predator that has decided to try patience. "You have courage," the cold voice said. "Your parents had courage. It did not save them, but I am not without mercy. Give me the stone, boy, and I will spare the family you love, all of them, the ones on the moor. I have had my servants watch that house for a year. Do you imagine I do not know exactly whom you would grieve? Give me the stone, and the Addamses live. Refuse me, and I will make of Blackpool Grange a monument, and I will take a very long time about it." And here the cold thing made its single, fatal error, the error that every cold thing had always made about Harry, from Vernon Dursley to the man from the county to the ancient patient dark itself, the error of believing that the way to move a boy was through his fear. Harry laughed. It was not the laugh of bravado. It was a real laugh, surprised and warm and genuinely delighted, and it rang across the firelit chamber and made the red eyes narrow, because it was the last sound Lord Voldemort had expected to hear. "You've never met my family," Harry said, wiping his eye, "or you know how funny that is. You're going to make a monument of Blackpool Grange. My grandmother has been trying to get it declared a monument for 40 years. The county keeps refusing. You're going to take a very long time killing the Addamses." He shook his head, grinning at the cold, dead face. "Nobody kills the Addamses. It's not that we can't die. It's that we're extremely good at it. We practice constantly, and we take everyone we love with us and half of everyone we don't. You threaten my family to frighten me. You've just told the most frightening people in England exactly where to find you, and they're already on the road. I sent the owl an hour ago." He spread his hands. "I didn't come down here to beat you, Tom. I came down here to keep you talking, and you're very, very good at talking." The red eyes flared. "Seize him," Voldemort shrieked. "The stone. Get the stone from his pockets. He has been given it. I see it in the mirror. Kill him." Quirrell lunged, and his hands closed around Harry's throat, and Harry felt the old deep thing happen. The thing his first mother had woven into him with her dying, and his second mother had fed every day for 7 years. The thing that had been growing in him under all that love like a pearl around a grain of sand. Where Quirrell's fingers touched Harry's skin, they began, instantly, to blister and to smoke and to crack like old plaster, and Quirrell screamed, and the cold voice screamed with him, and Harry stood in the strangling grip and did not pull away, because his family had taught him that when a thing that means you harm has made the mistake of touching you, you do not flinch, you let it learn. "It burns," Harry said almost gently over Quirrell's shrieking. "I know, it's love. You've never been able to bear it. My mother's first, and then 7 more years of it from a whole house full of people who chose me. That's a great deal of love, Tom, layered up thick, and you're trying to strangle a boy who's made almost entirely of it now, and it turns out that for something like you, that's the same as grabbing the sun." The blisters climbed Quirrell's arms. "You should let go. You won't, though. Your kind never lets go of the thing that's killing you. It's the whole reason you're a face on the back of a head." And it was at that precise moment, with Quirrell burning and the cold voice shrieking and the stone warm and secret in Harry's pocket, that the door of the last chamber came off its hinges. It did not open. It left. It flew the length of the chamber and struck the far wall and stayed there, and through the space where it had been came Blackpool Grange itself, or the moving heart of it, the whole strange family pouring into the firelit dark like a flood that had learned to wear black. Gomez Addams came first, because Gomez always came first when there was a chance to fence, and he came with a saber in each hand and a cigar in his teeth and his whole face alight, and he took in the scene at a glance, the burning man, the cold face, his son standing calm in the middle of it, and he cried, "Harry, you started without us. That's my boy. Hold him there. Don't let him leave. Your mother wants a word." Morticia came second, gliding, veiled, serene, and where she walked the firelight guttered and the shadows leaned toward her like courtiers, and she looked at the thing wearing Quirrell, at the cold dead face that had ordered the death of her son, and she did the thing she had done to the Dursleys and to the man from the county and to Albus Dumbledore, except that she did not, this time, bother to be polite about it. She lowered her veil. She smiled at Lord Voldemort. And it was the smile of a woman looking at a thing she has decided to remove from the world, unhurried, certain, almost fond, and the cold voice which had frightened a nation for 20 years faltered for the first time in its long half-life, because it had finally met something colder and older and completely without fear, and it did not know what she was. "You threaten my house," Morticia said, and her low voice filled the chamber more thoroughly than Voldemort's shriek had. "You sent watchers to my family. You put your hands on my son." She tilted her head, and the shadows tilted with her. "I have buried a great many things, creature. I have never once had to bury a child, and I do not intend to begin with the child of my heart, and I find that you have made me discover the outer edge of my patience, and I did not know until tonight that I had one. How exciting. You've taught me something about myself. I shall repay you thoroughly." Then the rest of the family arrived, and the last chamber of the thing that guarded the Philosopher's Stone became, in the space of 90 seconds, the single worst place in Britain to be a Dark Lord. Fester came in rolling his glowing, humming device before him, and shouting that he had waited his whole life to electrocute somebody who deserved it, and that this was the best night of his existence. And he threw a switch, and a web of blue lightning arced across the chamber and wrapped Quirrell's already smoking body in a cage of light that made the cold thing inside him howl. Grandmama came in flinging graveyard salt in wide practiced arcs over the left shoulder, always the left, and where the salt fell the shadow stuff that was Voldemort's true self recoiled and thinned, because the old woman's salt was older than his magic and had never respected it. Pugsley came in and did the one thing Pugsley did best, which was to produce from his coat a glass sphere of the nitrogen triodide he had finally, gloriously gotten to keep, and to lob it gently underhand at the base of the great mirror, where it went off with a crack that shook the chamber and filled it with acrid smoke and utter chaos, which was, everyone agreed later, exactly the sort of thing an 11-year-old was for. Thing came in at a sprint across the flagstones and went straight up Quirrell's burning body and got 2 fingers into the cold face's slitted nose and pulled, which distracted it beautifully. Lurch came in last and simply stood in the doorway, blotting out the light, and groaned a groan that the stones felt, and Lord Voldemort, ancient and terrible and reduced to a smoking shriek riding a dying man, understood that he was not, in this chamber, the most frightening thing present, and had not been from the moment the door left its hinges. It should be said, for the record the wizarding world would never keep, that the Addams family did not fight the way wizards fought, in tidy exchanges of colored light from a courteous distance. They fought the way a household defends its own, which is to say all at once, without discussion, each member doing the thing they were best at, with a total unhurried confidence that came from 800 years of never once losing a member they had decided to keep. Gomez harried the burning man with his sabers, laughing, hurting, never quite finishing, because his wife had asked for a word and Gomez would sooner die than deny his wife a word. Morticia held the cold thing's attention like a pin through a moth, so that it could not gather itself to flee, could not think, could do nothing but stare into the pale, unblinking eyes of the one predator it had ever met that it could not read. And around them the household worked, Fester's lightning, Grandmama's salt, Pugsley's chemistry, Thing's quick vicious hands, Lurch's blotting bulk in the doorway, a machine of family assembled and oiled and pointed, for once entirely outward at a single deserving target and enjoying every second of it. It was, Fester would insist for years afterward, the finest family outing they had ever taken, and he was outvoted only by Pugsley, who maintained to his dying day that nothing would ever top the moment his nitrogen triodide finally, after 9 reglazings and 1 lost chimney, went off exactly when and where he wanted it to in the face of a dark lord in front of his entire family, who had all, every one of them, been watching him do it. And Wednesday Addams walked through the smoke. She did not run, she did not shout. She came through the chaos her family had made, past the lightning and the salt and the smoke, to stand beside her brother, her own kind, the one she had claimed out of the rain when she was 5 and had promised, on a roof under a dying moon, that she would never let the world hand him alone. She looked at the burning man and the cold face and the whole shrieking ruin of the thing that had tried to strangle Harry, and she reached out without hurry and took Harry's hand, the one not holding the stone, and laced her cold fingers through his, exactly as she had in a churchyard 7 years before. "Sorry we're late," she said flatly to Harry, not looking at him, looking at Voldemort. "Father took a wrong turn at Sheffield, I told him. He wouldn't listen, we're here now." She considered the cold face with the patient professional disappointment she reserved for the world's worst things. "So this is what killed your mother. It's not much, I've seen worse in the compost." She tilted her head. "It's dying, you know, look at it. It bet everything on your fear and you didn't have any because we filled you up, and now it's a shadow leaking out of a corpse and it's about to run, because running is the only thing its kind has ever really been good at." She squeezed his hand once. "Let it run, don't chase it. Chasing is for lonely boys who need it to be over. You're not lonely and it's never over, and we'll get the rest of it another year together properly with the whole family and a picnic. That's a promise, let it go." And Harry standing in the middle of his whole enormous impossible family, holding his sister's hand, with the woman who had died for him woven into his skin, and the woman who had chosen him standing at his shoulder, and the stone warm and safe in his pocket, and the thing that had orphaned him screaming and burning and thinning to smoke before the sheer accumulated weight of everyone who loved him, did the most powerful thing he had ever done, which was to let go. He released Quirrell. He stepped back into the ring of his family. And the love-scorched body of the possessed professor crumbled all at once to a fall of gray dust and cloth, cartoonish and complete, the way a thing crumbles in a story rather than in a slaughterhouse, and out of the dust rose a shape of black smoke with a screaming face, the last shred of Lord Voldemort, houseless now, bodiless, beaten, and it gathered itself and it fled, howling up through the chamber and out and away into the night, because Wednesday was right. Because running was the only thing its kind had ever truly mastered. There was a silence in the smoke. The family closed around Harry in the settling dust, not in fear, because they did not do fear, but in the brisk proprietary fuss of a household counting its own. Grandmama seized his chin and turned his head to inspect his throat, where Quirrell's burning fingers had left no mark at all, and grunted her approval. Fester patted him down for damage with hands like warm hams and pronounced him gloriously intact. Pugsley wanted immediately and at length to know exactly how the burning had worked, whether it was heat or acid or something clever, and whether Harry could do it on command, and whether he would do it on command to Pugsley, just a little, for science. Thing scaled Harry's shoulder and gripped his ear once, which was Thing's entire vocabulary of relief. And Wednesday did not let go of his hand and did not intend to for some considerable time. "I'm all right," Harry told them, all of them, and it was true, and they could all see that it was true, and the seeing of it went around the smoky, ruined chamber like warmth around a hearth. "It grabbed me and it couldn't hold on. Mother was right, it's the love, there was too much of it in the way." He looked around at his family, the whole strange crowd of them standing in the wreckage they had made on his behalf, and something went through him that he had no single word for and did not need one. "You came." "Of course we came," said Grandmama, as though he had said something faintly stupid, which by the standards of the family he had. "You sent the owl." "Well," said Gomez, sheathing his sabers, beaming, "that was invigorating. Cara mia, did you see the boy? Did you see him hold that creature by the throat and lecture it? That's breeding. That's the Addams in him, and there's not a drop of our blood in the child, which only proves my point." "I saw him, mon amour," said Morticia, and crossed to Harry through the settling dust and took his face in her cool hands, and looked at him a long moment with her still pale face giving away, at last, one single thing, the one thing she permitted herself all night, the look of a woman regarding something she had made right and would dare the whole world to unmake. "You held the line, you kept it talking. You did not face it alone, and you did not run, and you let it go when letting go was harder than winning. My darling, you were raised exactly right." She kissed his forehead once over the scar. "Now, is there anyone else in this castle we ought to speak with before we go home?" There was, and he arrived a moment later, because Albus Dumbledore had never in his life missed an entrance, and he came down through the black fire at a run that his old legs should not have managed, his half-moon spectacles askew, his face gray, and he stopped in the ruined smoking chamber and took in the whole of it. The fall of dust that had been Quirrell, the salt, the blue afterglow of Fester's lightning, the crater of Pugsley's chemistry, the towering butler in the doorway, and in the center of it all, unharmed, unhurried, holding his sister's hand, the child he had raised from a distance to be a lonely weapon, standing instead in the middle of an army that loved him. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment, and something moved across his ancient face, and it was not calculation for once, and it was not the practiced grief he used as a tool. It was the real thing, arriving too late to be of use, the way it so often had in his long and terrible life. "I came as quickly as I could," he said. "The summons to the ministry was a forgery. I turned back at reading. I feared I would be too late." He looked at the dust. "I see that I was. And I see that it did not matter, because you were never as alone as I arranged for you to be." "You arranged for me to be very alone indeed, Professor," Harry said without heat, because heat was for people who had not already won. "For a long time on purpose, so that when this night came I'd walk down here by myself, hollow and brave and grateful, and do exactly what I just did, except that I'd have done it with nothing behind me and no reason to come back up." He gestured gently at his family. "You planned all of it except them. You never planned for them, and I want you to look at them, sir, and understand that this is what your plan produced, because they got to me first. Not a weapon, not a lonely hero, not a boy who will die on command for a world that owes him. Just a person who's loved, who fought the thing you wanted him to fight and lived, and is going home for supper." He paused. "Your plan worked, Professor. That's the part you're going to have to sit with. I did fight him. I will fight him again. You got everything you wanted. You just didn't get to make me small to do it, and it turns out you never needed to. That was the cruelty for nothing. That's the part that's yours to carry." Dumbledore was quiet a long time in the smoking dark, and he had faced dark lords and out-talked the cleverest people of his age, and he found again that he had no answer, because there was none, because Harry was right, and being told the truth kindly by someone you have wronged is the one blow there is no parrying. "I have made a great many terrible bargains in my life, Harry," he said at last, very low, "and told myself each was necessary, and I believe tonight that I have just watched one of them turn out to have been unnecessary all along, which is the worst thing a man of my sort can ever learn, and I am too old to learn it gently." He straightened, and there was a cost in it, and he let it show. "You will always have a place at this school, for as long as you wish it, on your terms, not mine. I will not manage you again. I have not the right, and I have lost tonight the last of the certainty that let me pretend I did." He looked at Morticia and inclined his silver head low, the bow of a beaten man to the power that beat him. "Madam, I underestimated you in a wand shop a year ago, and I have gone on underestimating you every day since, and I have paid for it exactly as much as I deserved, and not one nut less. Your son is safe because of you, and the world is safer because of your son, and I did neither of those things, and I arranged, God help me, against both. If there is ever anything Hogwarts can do for the family that succeeded where I failed, you have only to ask. There is one thing, said Morticia serenely. Name it. Stop planning his death, she said, whatever the prophecy asks, whatever the greater good demands. My son will decide himself in his own time, surrounded by the people who love him, how and whether he spends his life, and he will not be seasoned or steered or spent by you or by anyone ever again. If you have a plan that requires my child to die Chief Warlock, you will bring it to this family and you will lay it on our table, and we will decide it together, all of us, in the daylight with tea. Her pale eyes held his. The days of arranging Harry from a tower are over. That is my price, and it is not negotiable, and I think from your face that you already know I will collect it whether you agree or not. So agree. It's tidier. I agree, said Albus Dumbledore, and meant it, and it was, perhaps, the first wholly honest and wholly unselfish thing he had promised in 50 years. And it had taken a woman in black from a moor with no wand and no wish to rule anything to wring it out of him, and he understood, standing in the smoke, that this was as it should be, and that he had spent his whole life waiting for someone to finally, kindly stop him. And had never once imagined it would be a family that laughed at death, and had picked his weapon up out of the rain and loved it into a person. Harry paused at the ruined doorway on his way out with his family, and looked back at the old man standing alone in the smoke, small now and gray, and terribly tired, a man who had spent a lifetime being the cleverest person in every room, and had just been outloved in his own castle by people he had dismissed as merely strange. For what it's worth, Professor, Harry said, I don't hate you. My family thinks I should, and they might be right, they usually are. But you made a mistake with me that I turned out to be the single luckiest person alive to have had made, because it put me in the rain on the day the Addamses drove past, and everything good in my life came out of your worst decision. He regarded the old man kindly. That's not forgiveness. You haven't earned that, and you might never, and I won't lie to you about it, because you get enough comfortable lies from yourself already. But it isn't hate either. It's only the truth, laid on the table in the daylight the way my mother likes it. You spent my whole childhood trying to arrange me into a hero. You could simply have asked me to be one. I'd have said yes. I was raised to. And he turned and walked out of the last chamber with his sister's cold hand in his, leaving Albus Dumbledore alone with the dust and the salt and the broken mirror and the enormous unfamiliar weight of having been, at the very last, forgiven for nothing and understood for everything, which was, the old man would think for the rest of his days, both the kindest and the most terrible thing anyone had ever done to him. They went home that night, the whole strange crowd of them in the hearse, north up the dark moor road toward the falling-down house that had caught a starving boy 7 years before and made of him, without anyone deciding to, without any plan at all, exactly what he was meant to be. The stone road in Morticia's reticule, to be returned to its makers in the morning with a note. The family did not want it, having never once in 800 years wished to live forever, on the grounds that forever was for people who had not yet found anything worth ending for. Harry sat wedged between Wednesday and the window, Hedwig on his knee, Pugsley asleep against Fester's shoulder, Gomez singing something Portuguese and probably illegal, Grandmama snoring, Thing keeping watch on the dashboard, Lurch driving them steadily home. You could have died, Wednesday said quietly to the dark glass, not looking at him. It was the closest she had come all night to saying the enormous thing. I didn't, said Harry. I know, I calculated it. 17 ways it could have gone wrong before we reached Sheffield. I checked them all against your face when we came through the door, and none of them had happened, and I have decided to be furious about the 17 anyway, retroactively, for the rest of my life as a hobby. She was quiet a moment. Out on the moor, something cried and was answered. Don't do it again, or if you do, do it with me already in the room. I claimed you first. I get to be there. That's the arrangement. That's always been the arrangement, since the rain. Harry looked at her, the fierce, quiet girl who had reached into her pocket in a graveyard and handed a starving stranger the only thing she loved, and who had spent 7 years being exactly, precisely right about the one important thing she had ever needed to be right about. And he took her cold hand in the dark of the car and laced his fingers through hers, and neither of them said anything else because the rest was understood, and had been since the beginning, and would be, they both knew. Until the very end, whenever, wherever, and however gloriously macabre that end turned out to be. My own kind, Wednesday said at last to the window, so quietly that only Harry could hear it. Your own kind, Harry agreed. The hearse reached the moor at dawn and came up the long drive past the family cemetery in the gray first light, past the welcome gate and the leaning stones, and stopped before the great crooked house, which had lit every window against their coming, because the house always knew. And they poured out of the car, the whole tired, triumphant, strange crowd of them, into the cold, sweet morning air of home, and Grandmama went to make breakfast, and Gomez carried a sleeping Pugsley up to bed, and Lurch put the car away, and Fester wandered off to charge, and the machine of the family came, gently, to rest. Harry did not go straight in. He stood a moment on the wet gravel in the dawn, breathing the moor and the graveyard and the beeswax and old stone smell of the open door, and he looked at the little cemetery under the leaning oak. At the plot Wednesday had given him at 4 years old, his own square of earth, his somewhere to end up, and he found that he was, of all the improbable things, entirely and completely happy, which was a word the family used sparingly and only ever when it was true. Wednesday came to stand beside him close, their shoulders not quite touching, and looked where he was looking. "You've still got your plot," she observed. "I checked, nobody's taken it. I would have made them give it back." "Thank you," said Harry. "It's a good plot," said Wednesday. "South-facing, the worst light. You can see the whole moor from it if you were the sort of thing that could still see, which you won't be, which is the point." She was quiet a moment. Somewhere in the house, Grandmamma began tunelessly to sing over the pots. "Don't use it for a long time, though, that's an order. I have decided I am going first, and you are going to have to stand at the edge of the hole and be sad, and I want to watch, and I cannot watch if you have beaten me to it. So live, Harry. It's the one dangerous thing I will ever ask of you." She turned and went into breakfast and did not look back, because she never did, because looking back was for people who doubted the person behind them would follow. Harry looked at his plot a moment longer in the good-bad light, and then he followed his sister into the warm, loud, macabre morning of the only home he had ever wanted, and the great door of Blackpool Grange closed behind him with a sound like a house well pleased. Behind them, far to the south, the wizarding world was left to tell whatever story it liked about the boy who lived, and to get it wrong as it always had, because the true story was never a story about a lonely orphan or a chosen hero or a weapon forged in a cupboard for a great and terrible purpose. It was a story about a family that went to a funeral and found a child in the rain, and decided without a plan, against all sense, in the oldest and deepest magic there is, to keep him. And they did, for the rest of their long, strange lives they did. Chapter 7 End.